Let's convene the meeting. You join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Villalobos, would you make the TV coverage announcement for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSP TV Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcast of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSP TV Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on the county's website and will be available for download in a day or two. Would you like me to move on to the roll call, sir?
I would. Thank you, Mr. Villalobos.
All right. Commissioner Brown? Here. Commissioner Cooney? Here. Commissioner Farini?
Here.
Commissioner Blau?
Here.
And Chair Park?
Here.
Thank you.
Obviously, Commissioner Blau and Commissioner Farini are in Santa Maria today. I can't see any lights turn on when you want to speak, so just speak up, okay?
We will. Do that, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, can we have the agenda status report from Mr. Wilson?
Good morning. Let me start again. Thank you. Good morning, Chair, members of the Commission. In regards to the status of the agenda today, we have 4 items listed on the agenda for your review and consideration. And just a matter of note, we did get a continuance request yesterday for the first item on the agenda, which is the helistop on the Carpinteria Valley Farms, that once we get to that portion of the agenda, the Commission can bring that item up for discussion and action on that request. Other than that, staff is available and ready to present on all those items today.
Very good. Mr. Wilson, will you go on to the projection report?
Chair and Commissioners, reviewing the projection report, at our prior hearing, we canceled the July 3rd hearing, and then on July 10th, the items on July 10th were rescheduled to later in the projection report, and we can go over that when the time comes. So as of right now, we don't have any items scheduled for July 10th, so we can take action on that hearing date, and I don't project anything being placed on that agenda at this time for July 10th. So we can take action on that later in the meeting or after I review the projection report. Our next meeting after that, July 10th, is going to be on July 31st, and there are 4 items listed on that date, and that will be here in Santa Barbara. And then we will reconvene, and then on August 7th, we had canceled that hearing as well. And so we had set a special hearing for August 8th, which is the Thursday after that Wednesday. And there are 3 items scheduled on August 8th. 2 of those were the ones that were rescheduled off of the July 10th hearing date. And then 1 was already scheduled for August 8th. So there's 3 items projected for that date, and that would be located in Santa Maria. And so just so everyone knows, that is a Thursday on August 8th. And then we will reconvene on August 14th. And then as in our previous hearing on the ERG project, we had rescheduled it to this date on August 14th. However, we did receive a request, I believe it was yesterday, for them to remove that item off the agenda due to some applicants' request to review some other information and make potential changes to the project description. So on August 14th, there's going to be a request to remove that off the projection report, and then it'll be, that would be the ERG item. the very first item on the projection report, ERG Operating Company, West Cat Canyon, and the Energy and Minerals. So we have placed items on August 14th. There's a telecom, and then there's a development that was on August 8th that is now going to be on August 14th. That's a Keysite 2. The Orchid Gateway Retail has been scheduled. So we'll have 2 meetings in Santa Maria back-to-back on August 8th and then August 14th. And then August 28th, Commissioner Brown has indicated that she will be absent, and we don't have any items agendized for that date. And then September 4th, there are no items scheduled on that date either. However, there are a number of applications in process that could potentially be scheduled for that date. But as of yet, there is no items projected for that date. And then we'll be back on September 11th in Santa Maria. And then after that, we'll be here in Santa Barbara on September 25th. So that concludes the projection report. I think that's as far out as we go.
Let me ask a question. Do any of you have questions? Any other commissioners? Gentlemen in Santa Maria, do you have any questions of Mr. Wilson on the projection report?
No, thank you.
Mr. Wilson, I can't remember if we have discussed before those items that were their cannabis appeal hearings that were continued from July, is it 10 to August 8? What was the reason for those continuances? Maybe we've discussed that and I forgot.
Chair Park, Chair Park, members of the commission, we had not previously discussed those items. And so as staff was coordinating with the applicants and reviewing the materials and looking at our timelines, it was determined to move those to the August 8th date for scheduling and further information that we were evaluating on the projects.
And sort of related to that is I know we're going to have a lot of cannabis hearings this year. I'm just wondering, is it likely that these dates in September can fill up or will fill up with cannabis hearings? Is it possible?
Chair Park, members of the commission, at this point, I would recommend leaving those dates open in September, only as we're finding that there are some projects that are being appealed, so we would want to have that flexibility to have hearings to address any of those appeals. And there's other projects that could potentially be placed on there that are currently being processed at this time.
Right.
So there is a chance that those hearings could fill up with more applications.
So September doesn't look too busy right now, but it could change. All right. Great. Well, thank you. Okay. Next item is public comment on items that are not on today's agenda. Did I miss something?
I'm just wondering if we couldn't take action on a couple of those earlier open dates, July 10, August 28. If so, I would make a motion to continue or to cancel both hearing dates. We can certainly wait and see what else comes up today, but I'll just throw it out there.
I think that's an appropriate motion
Okay,
for now.
Mr. Chair, before you do that, my plans might change. I'm not sure that's a problem. It's when you plan ahead. So perhaps you could leave that.
Well, then let's start with July 10th.
Yeah, just do July 10th if you, yeah.
We have a motion on the floor to continue or to cancel the July 10 meeting.
Right.
Is there a second?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll second. Thank you.
I'll have to do a roll call. Okay. Will you conduct a roll call vote, Mr. Villalobos?
Commissioner Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney.
Aye.
Commissioner Farini.
Aye.
Commissioner Blau.
Aye.
Chair Park.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay. All right, now let's go to public comment on items that are not otherwise on the agenda. And so I have a speaker slip from Nancy Emerson.
Good morning, Chairman Park and Commissioners. I'm speaking personally today, and I live in Solvang. I was glad to hear the question of whether you're going to talk again about cannabis brought up because I feel like time is running out, and the community and the Board of Supervisors need more advice from you. Those of us not having to live or have wine tasting rooms or organic farms next to cannabis grows can be even-handed, use long-established beliefs about minimum control of agriculture. But that has not answered what I think is the underlying question now, and that is what land use regulations are essential if cannabis is to successfully coexist with neighbors. Is there some size parcel where it's okay? Is there any odor abatement technology that eliminates odor of indoor activities from escaping? Very questionable if we can control in hoop structures, and no way to control if it's a true outdoor grow. We invited cannabis into the tent, but we said regulations would protect neighborhood character and minimize potential for negative impacts on neighbors. That tips the even-handedness a little bit toward neighbors, I think. We solved the problem for Montecito because we gave them a ban. We may need to consider bans for some other agricultural zones, particularly Ag 5 and 10. But bans are not a possible solution for most of the neighbors. What land ordinance, the ordinance did a good job of dealing with fencing, security, lighting, noise, trees, habitat, wildlife, waste discharge, even tried to deal with odor abatement, but it has few limitations on where cannabis activities can occur. We just don't have answers yet to the question of what an allowable size of parcel is and what the size of grows need to be, even the question of water usage. And it's not entirely a one-sided question. It's hard for cannabis with its requirements to coexist with other agriculture, even organic. It's hard to afford the land. There are lots of requirements and costs to operate legally, and I'm sensitive to that. But we've got people now, they're personally affected, they're appealing, they're threatening lawsuits, even suggesting getting the grand jury involved, and I just feel like the rest of us need to keep trying to find a way to make it work, or else just give up and say ban it and turn it over to the sheriff. And I don't want that to happen. Also, I want to work on agricultural tourism, and I'm really worried that cannabis and social media could make the San Ynez Valley, for one place, not very inviting. So thank you, and good luck.
Thank you for your comment, and remind everyone there's a very important Board of Supervisors hearing on July 9th that will address some of those issues. Also, we have Mark Chatillo. Mark, you here?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I'm Mark Chatillo, and I'm appearing as an individual. I wanted to follow, I guess, Ms. Emerson, just in an issue that I've been pursuing with staff, and I wanted to bring to the commission's attention, because I know for many of you this has been the issue of noticing and involving the public in the issuance of land use clearances and land use permits was an important item that your commission discussed. And it's one that I've had some communications with Mr. Wilson and Director Plowman to try and get a better understanding of how noticing works, how it should work in dealing with these lesser permits. Because there's a great deal of community interest in these, from the land use clearance for the hoops, to land use permit for cannabis activities and others. And right now, from what I can discern from the code, there's a requirement that the applicant submit a notification to owners within 1,000 feet of an application. But then these applications sit for many, many months as they go through completeness determinations and then analysis and ultimately a determination. And for those of us that regularly watch and appear before your commission or the zoning administrator, there are published agendas, and so there's an ability of the public to know when a permit is coming up for approval. But there's no such dignity that is afforded to the director's determination and the director's issuance of permits. And with a 10-day appellate window, it makes it very challenging. And as you know, in the case of cannabis, there are hundreds of permits that are in play at the county. As to hoops, I wouldn't even hazard a guess. But this is, in terms of the involvement of the public and the engagement in this permitting activity and the entitlements that are being granted at this level, at these lower levels, there is not a clear way for the public to track it. And so I've suggested that, that there be posting on the website for permits that are approaching an approval stage, and a process for notifying when a permit is issued in real time. I noted for your commission's action on the G&K appeal. In every case, when your commission takes an action, there's an action letter as an appellant or as an interested party. Those are public information. The G&K action letter of your planning commission was released to the public after the appellate period had closed. So we have some real problems with the process that's going on here, and it's something that does deserve your attention. I do believe it's within staff's jurisdiction to be able to address this, but I want your commission to know that this is something that is a continuing problem and something that some of us in the community are continuing to raise. Thank you.
I appreciate the problem, and I'll also appreciate any future transmission of a practical, specific suggestion on how to fix that. Thank you. Okay, any other public comment? Let's move on to the Planning Commissioner's informational reports. I have some. Does anybody else?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Well, why don't you start,
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Brown?
Just to follow on from Mr. Shatillo's comments, because I have been through the director's decision process, and it's only because I'm sort of an insider, if you will, that I could follow it. Because and I've discussed this with Mr. Wilson after the 80 North Patterson appeal hearings, which this commission heard, about the process, and made comment about it continually because it was rather arduous, and there's no way you can follow it. It's very, very difficult, and I would concur with what Mr. Shatillo says. There needs to be a better way to inform and to let the public know that this is occurring, because sometimes going through the director, because the level of what Madam Plowman considers, it can be considerably important to the community, particularly my community where I live. So I think that that's something we can put on long-range planning, someplace that it doesn't ever get lost in the mix of things. I think it would be important. So I just want to echo what he's said. Thank you.
Great. Well, I have 2 items to report, and one is actually for the 2nd district, so I'll follow you on that. This is sort of a feel-good story, or I see it as one. I'm sure that other commissioners will remember an application by an organization called the Dance Studio, and they were a dance studio that was going into a shopping center in Goleta. And many of us wondered, Commissioner Blau did, and I joined, why this was something that needed to be a CUP, given all the effort those people went through and the money they spent to do this. I have an employee at my office who attends that studio, and she reported to me that by getting that permit and going into that shopping center, they now have 3 studio rooms instead of 1. They've drastically increased their service to the public, and they're going to be having performances at the Center Stage Theater in Paseo Nuevo this weekend. I think if I get it right, it's Friday night and Saturday matinee, Sunday matinee, and also Saturday night. and they have so many participants, they had to break it into 2 shows, a show for juniors and a show for seniors. And when they talk about seniors there, they mean everyone from about 14 to 84, because they have people that do this. So it's just something to think about, that these decisions that we make have real implications, and we need to consider how they deal with real human beings sometimes, and they can be both good and bad, and also continue to look at the process and look to see if something that's so beneficial to the public really needed to go through a CUP process. So that's one thing to report. Another one, and seeing Ms. Emerson reminded me that WeWatch held a forum last Thursday evening on agricultural tourism and farm stays, and that's important because we'll be considering farm stays as part of the development of a new ordinance this year. I moderated it, so I was there, and it was very well attended by all segments of agriculture. It was kind of fun to watch people in the wine industry and the cannabis industry complimenting each other for their ideas. And it's something I'm really excited about and will work on going forward. So those are my informational reports. Should we go on to the minutes? We have 2 sets of minutes, those for the May 29 meeting and for the June 5th meeting. So let's start with May 29. Does anyone have any comments on those?
I'll move approval.
Do we have a second? Any further deliberation on this? No. Mr. Villalobos, will you conduct the roll call?
Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Cooney.
Aye.
Commissioner Farini.
Aye.
Commissioner Blau.
Aye.
Chair Park.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Let's go on to the June 5 minutes. Do any of my fellow commissioners have comments on the June 5 minutes? Would anyone like to propose a motion to approve them?
Second.
Thank you. Not hearing any requests for deliberations, Mr. Villalobos, will you conduct the roll call vote?
Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Cooney.
Aye.
Commissioner Farini.
Aye.
Commissioner Blau.
Aye.
Chair Park.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's go on to the director's report, and I see Ms. Plowman here, so let's go.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I wanted to give you a bit of an update about what's happening at the Board of Supervisors and an action that the Coastal Commission recently took. In early June, the Coastal Commission approved took their final action on the ADUs for the coastal zone. So that's now in place. They accepted our acceptance of their changes. Then on the 16th, last week, we went to the board on CREF, and I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the types of projects that CREF is funding this year, because I thought you might find that of some interest. So we had about $250,000 of allocations that we made. One was for a company called Nature Track, which takes students around on nature trips, and we're helping them fund with another vehicle so that they can do twice as many trips. And they do a lot of work in the North County, getting the kids out into down to the beach or in different locations. So that's a really great program.
Yeah, they're very well regarded.
Mm-hmm. And then we provided some funding to Wildlife Network for treating ailing seabirds from when they get oil on them. And that's been happening. Either there's been minor spills here and there, or there's seeps. And so they're finding a fair number of seabirds that are covered in oil. So we're helping fund that. Some money for Lookout Park renovation that the Parks Department, CSD, is undertaking, which is in Summerland. Then so we're providing some funding for the Halama Coastal Trail that's going to be in the area that was just recently provided to the county from the Danger Mom Preserve, which will be really nice. Yeah, and maybe we can do some kind of a little bit of a loop trail there for people to walk out to that end. There was money granted to Carrillo High School up in North County. They actually have a tide pool facility, and it's run by the students and volunteers, and they do a really great job and bringing kids in, learning about sea life. So we gave them money to rehab their facilities. And then in Guadalupe Dunes, the Cecil B. DeMille movie set that's buried out there. There's one final excavation that's taking place, and so we helped provide some funding for that. It's one of the large statues that was left in the dunes. So those are the projects that came through on CREF this year. Oh, actually, we gave money to the city of Goleta to help them purchase a property on Matilda Drive. Yeah. The other things I wanted to advise the board of, where'd my notes go? We do have on July 9th, as you mentioned, we have the Planning Commission's recommendations on cannabis on Ag 1 and the inland areas going up to the board, and the expanded noticing in EDRNs. And then we have the appeal of the decision on G&K Farms. That's going to be going to the board. We're working on setting a date. It looks like we won't be going until August to get resolution on that because of inability for the appellant to be able to attend any hearings in July. And then the Patterson Avenue appeal was scheduled for the 16th of July, but that's going to be continued based on a request from the applicant, who I think wants to try and work some issues out. We don't have a date. And that's
Is there a Guinness Book of Records entry for the longest running Santa Barbara County appeal? This seems to me like this would be a candidate for that. Which you initiated.
Oh, actually, I only did this. I only did the third one. I didn't.
Okay.
No, I did the second and the third one. Sorry.
All right. Well,
1998 for that project site. So
don't have
it's
staff
20
research and answer
21
my
years.
question.
Right.
But
it's rhetorical. I understand that.
good.
And that was a director's decision. All Ms. Plowman's fault.
Since we brought up the farm stay ordinance, I know kind of a step or next step, whatever we want to call it, was to hire a consultant to develop the ordinances.
Correct.
And that's been funded already by the board. I know you had there were some hearings.
Yes. So when we made it, maybe I haven't been here since we made it through the budget hearings, but budget hearings were finalized. We actually were able to end up adding 4 staff for cannabis through that budget process because they're cost recovery. And then we did get the additional funding for the farm stays. So we will be moving forward with that. I don't think we've brought on a consultant yet, but that's pending here shortly.
Got it. And so when would the consultant start work, you think?
I would say fall, late fall, maybe.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah,
Okay, well, thank you.
sure.
Ms. Plowman, will the 4 new staff people be in processing applications for cannabis?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, they will be.
So that would
Yes.
add to the 2 that are currently, I don't know, how many do you have there?
Oh, we
currently?
have 6 currently, I believe.
Processing applications?
And that's enforcement and processing applications.
Okay. Yeah, I just,
Do you want to comment on that? Jeff?
we have one here.
Just, Commissioner Brown to the chair. So we were approved for 4
New.
full-time positions, 2 enforcement and 2 permitting. So currently we do have 2 staff that's doing full-time permitting. However, we have been reallocating resources from other planners. So we have probably another 2 staff, not probably, we do have 2 additional staff that's working on cannabis that we'd like to say part-time, but it's becoming more than part-time. So we have reallocated additional resources to work on the cannabis. So there's currently, as Director Plowman indicated, there's currently like 6 staff that's working on it, some varying on the degrees that they're working on it. But we are currently in the recruitment process, and we're looking at trying to increase the numbers of full-time staff to do processing.
So these new planners you recruit, are they going to go straight to cannabis, or will you reallocate somebody existing to cannabis and they'll do something else? I just can't imagine putting these new baby planners in the field of cannabis.
Mr. Chair. Depending on who is hired, some planners will have some experience. So we have looked at making adjustments and potentially putting other people on other types of projects and development review, and then moving more experienced staff with people who are experienced with the county's code on cannabis, but we'll look at our resource allocation to see what makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for paying attention to that. It's important for the whole county to get that thing working.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall we go on to the standard agenda? Could you read the first item into the record, Mr. Villalobos?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Patrick M. Nesbitt, owner, to consider case numbers 19 CUP4 and 19 CDP 55, applications filed on February 7, 2019, and to adopt the negative declaration 19 NGD4 pursuant to the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Okay, do any of my fellow planning commissioners want to make disclosures on site visits or ex parte contacts? Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a longtime familiarity with the proposed Helistop sites and went by again, not on site, gates were closed, but in the surrounding area. And then in the course of the last 10 days, I have met with the applicant, Mr. Nesbitt, and in addition, attended a meeting of interested citizens. I have a long list of names that before we proceed with deliberations on this matter, I will read off.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Brown?
Yeah. The Planning Commission saw another project of Mr. Nesbitt's back, I think in 2009. And I made an extensive site visit then with Mr. Nesbitt. And I'm drive by the property quite frequently on my way to Carp, to the nurseries over there, because I'm a gardener. So I'm very familiar with the property in the area.
Anybody in Santa Maria?
Yes, Chair Park, I did go down there last week and reviewed the property and the surrounding area just to familiarize myself with it.
Okay, I used to live in that area. I know it very well, but I didn't visit it for this project. I did have a very brief phone call last night with Mr. Chip Woolbrandt just to discuss whether he knew there was a request for a continuance. Okay. Do we have a staff presentation?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, yes, staff is ready to present. However, the applicant has requested the hearing be continued from today to September 4th in order for him to be able to review all of the comment letters that have been submitted and to respond to them. And staff does support this request for continuance to September 4th.
And that takes this is a question for you, Mr. Wilson, a vote of the commission, correct? I mean, I don't have the discretion to either grant or deny the request. It takes a vote of the commission.
So, Chair Park, members of the commission, that is correct. So being that the item was noticed and agendized for this hearing today, it would take a motion and an action by the commission to reschedule it or continue it to another date.
And I would presume that county council would advise us that we would require public comment on this particular motion if one were to be made?
Chair Park, you presume correctly. I would recommend that as it is a noticed item on the agenda that you take public comment. It is within the chair's discretion to limit the amount of time and to encourage the public to limit their comments as to the request for a continuance at this time, with the understanding that there will be an opportunity to address the merits of the project.
I'm a little confused by that. I guess we should attend to this issue first, the continuance or not. We've had continuances before on other matters. I can remember one in the Hoop House hearing where we had a lot of the public sitting there in the audience. They then learned of a continuance, and we held public comment on anyway because they took the time to come down here. And so what you're suggesting is we have public comment only on the continuance first, and then if we don't continue it, because I don't favor continuing it, I'll confess that, then we would have public comment on the issue on its merits as we proceeded through. Is that what you're suggesting?
Chair Park, to clarify, my intended advice was that the chair has discretion to limit the amount of time, and what I meant to emphasize was that the chair, for purposes of time management, could encourage the public to focus on the continuance. It's really within the chair's discretion to put limits on the time. The public has the ability to address the item as noticed on the agenda at this time.
Well, if I open it for public comment on the motion to continue, if there is one, am I then foreclosed for reopening the hearing for public comment on the merits?
Chair Park, members of the commission, as council is articulating, the action that would be for consideration is whether or not the commission is going to be continuing that. So the public comments would be related to that action that the commission's contemplating taking. And if it's continued to whatever date, then when we have the hearing on that particular item, then the public is available and have the opportunity to speak on the merits of the project at that time, because then that would be the action before the commission at that time. So as council has recommended, the action that would be considered would be the continuance, and so the public comments would be related to that action. So you would not be precluded to having public comments on the merits of the project when that project came before you for consideration and deliberation.
Which might be 10 minutes from now. Okay, so let's start with, is there any motion to continue this?
Mr. Chair, I was disappointed to get notice from staff in the afternoon yesterday that they were agreeing with a request from the applicant to continue the matter. As with some other items that have come before the commission in recent weeks, this item has attracted a great deal of public interest and comment. It has come in heavy flows, but very much at the end of the public comment time. And I'm sympathetic with the applicant's need to address comments that he only saw for the first time yesterday afternoon. I think it would be as much as I think it would be a disadvantage to the applicant, it is also a disadvantage to the members of the public who, through word of mouth, learned that the hearing was likely to be continued today. So the commission is between a very hard rock and a very hard place in going forward with the hearing. For that reason, I move that we grant the continuance and then settle on a date later in the summer to take the matter up.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we'll have deliberations on the motion. I want to make some comments. Does anybody else want to make comments? Oh, sorry. Now we'll have public comment. That's correct. Well, first, does anyone have questions of staff on this item? Okay, we'll move to public comment. Do we have any speaker slips?
So Chair Park, members of the commission, I believe the applicant would also like to address the commission if that would be under the consideration of the commission as well.
That would be fine. Is Mr. Nesbitt?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As Mr. Cooney pointed out, I had a meeting with him yesterday, and it was only then I found that there was a lot of correspondence, almost, I guess, opposed to my application. Since I filed for this application almost 2 years ago, I have engaged in an outreach program to meet with members of the community to explain exactly what I was asking for and what we intended to do. As a result, I got 100% of my neighbors within a half-mile radius of my proposed helistop supporting me. In addition, I have a letter of support from every first responder organization in Santa Barbara County based upon their experience during the recent Thomas Fire and flood situation where they used my property extensively for evacuation of people that were injured, hurt, needed to be transported to hospitals outside the area of Santa Barbara. So for the sake of trying to reach an understanding with the community, I haven't seen the letters yet. Here they are available, and Ms. Harmon was very kind to put them on a website. I haven't been able to download them as yet. I hopefully will be able to do that tomorrow. But I would like to be able to have an opportunity to go out and meet with these community groups that do have concerns, show them what I showed my neighbors and got my neighbors to support 100%. And I think I can convince a lot of these people that their concerns are not warranted, and that we could probably make the next meeting fairly short. But with a continuance, I'll at least have an opportunity to try and get in front of people and explain exactly what we're planning to do.
Mr. Nesbitt, I have a few questions of you since you're asking for a continuance and you're there at the podium, and I think these are relevant items for that request.
Sure.
I read through the materials for several hours in preparation for this, so I'm ready to go. And some of the materials I read included two letters from people that were involved in horses. And one said the gentleman had ridden for 50 years and around the area, and his horses didn't mind. And that they didn't mind the helicopters landing and taking off from your field. And another one from somebody who has a horse business said that his horses that are regularly on the beach don't have any problem with the helicopters that come to and fro your location. And that made me think, well, you know, maybe this application for a helistop isn't for a helicopter activity that's going to start as a fresh thing if you get a permit, but it's something that's already ongoing. And then I also saw Exhibit J to the staff report, and it shows a plastic tarp that'll be the helistop, but behind it is a building that looks an awful lot like an aircraft hangar. So I'm just wondering, do you actually have helicopters taking on and off from your property now? And I'm not talking about emergency services. I'm talking about for your own use.
Yes, sir. For the 25 years I've owned my property, helicopters have regularly come in and out of my property. When I first acquired the property, I asked people in the county what the requirements for a helicopter were, and they said in agriculturally zoned property, you don't have a permit requirement. My property is zoned agricultural. So for 23 of those 25 years, helicopters regularly, and that's not every day, I mean, once or twice a month, maybe at most, we're using my property to land.
So
There are
Chair
11
Park,
there are 11 other.
Mr. Nesbitt, hold on a second. Chair Park, just a matter of clarification. The motion on the floor was to continue it. We're starting to move into discussion of the project. So
No, we're not. What
my-
I'm doing is I'm asking about this because if we continue it, okay, we may have an illegal use that's there right now. It's not declared that way in the staff report, but we may have one. And I'm curious if it's actually occurring, because if it is occurring and we continue this for several months, then it's likely it would continue to occur. So I'm very interested in this as being completely relevant to the motion on the floor to continue it or not. And if we continue it, will that activity cease or will it continue to occur?
So, Chair
that's
Park-
why I'm bringing it up.
Yeah, I understand. So Chair Park, my recommendation is if we want to receive and accept evidence into the record in regards to this project, that we follow the procedures and hear the project. If you want to do that, then we can still continue it after following the normal procedures on hearing and receiving information on the project. So currently, the motion on the floor is whether or not to continue the project, not the merits of the project or any evidentiary information on the project. So I would recommend that the commission, if they want to move forward and receive information on the project, then we just follow the standard procedures as far as taking presentation and information testimony on the project and then continuing it, if you would like to do that, or continuing it now and then receiving information at a later hearing. So that's my recommendation and for the council to consider. So before we get too far down this, the commission needs to decide on what information and what path they would like to take today.
I'd like to let and I will direct Mr. Nesbitt to finish answering my question. He was explaining how he came to be here.
Okay. Again, for 23...
Thank you for your recommendation, Mr. Wilson.
23 to 25 years I own the property. Helicopters used my property on a frequent basis, not, like I say, all the time. Excuse me. There are approximately 11 other helistop areas, helistops in our immediate area around our community. They are currently being used, again, infrequently, but being used. Since I got notice from the county not to use my property for the helistop, no helicopters have landed or taken off from my property for over 2 years, with 2 exceptions. First exception was during the Thomas Fire when several helicopters came in and out. I also did one demonstration flight from my neighbors next door to show to them that my helistop was not going to interfere with the enjoyment of their home. And other than that, there's been no helicopters flying in and out of my property. There are, however, helicopters flying in and out of the other 11 plus helistops in our community.
Thank you, Mr. Nesbitt. Anybody else have any questions, Mr. Nesbitt, while he's at the podium? Relevant to this motion to continue? Okay, well, thank you. Let's go on to our other speakers. Allison Gruby, do you have comments relevant to the motion to continue? Looks like it because you're walking up there. We have a 3-minute speaker limit for public comment. I don't know if you need even 3 minutes on this, but
No,
that's your limit.
no, thank you very much. I'm a resident in Serena Park, and I'm very familiar with the helicopter traffic that's in the area. And as a homeowner, just a little over a mile away from Mr. Nesbitt, I'm 100% against allowing for another helicopter pad. The noise, the disturbance, this allows for more traffic in the area. He already addressed the amount of helicopter traffic that is happening in the area. This is setting a precedent for more large properties in the area to have more helicopter pads, to have more traffic. He mentioned that he's currently not flying because he's been asked not to because of this project. My experience is that the property that's on in my backyard, 3282 and 3284, had a helicopter flying in regularly for polo. When that individual purchased the land, he stopped flying in, but then let the gentleman from the Miramar start landing. This is in my backyard. I have an old home. It shakes the house. It rattles everything. Later on, he started flying in on Wednesdays. One day, the pilot didn't know the flight plan that was agreed on, flew over the neighborhood and almost took out a palm tree. I have significant reason to be concerned for my safety, for the neighborhood, for the traffic, for the precedents this sets. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Chitillo, you speak on this issue of the potential continuance.
Good morning again, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Mark Chitillo. I'm here on behalf of several community organizations and homeowner associations and individuals. I think the volume of the public comment that you've received bespeaks the significance of the community's concern about this. With respect to the continuance, we do not object to that. And in fact, since this is one of those things, rock in a hard place, where once the staff memo goes out, a lot of the public doesn't show up. I got a lot of calls, and I appreciate the communications that staff and others had with me yesterday to try and clarify that. But really, you can't proceed with it now because the public, many of them are not here that are interested because of this continuance request. We support begrudgingly the request for a continuance. Staff has suggested September 4th. We think that that is not an appropriate date, 2 days after Labor Day. I know that a number of the people that I've been working with are not going to be available. And I understand that September 25th is a potential date here in Santa Barbara, and that is a date that we would support for the extension of this hearing. In the meantime, I think that there is a problem, Mr. Chair, that you've identified with respect to the illegal activities, and I would ask that staff undertake a process to provide additional resources for the public to be able to respond and lodge complaints. You've heard that there's 11 other helistops. None of them are permitted in the coastal zone and in the community. This is having a pretty significant effect on the community. It certainly bears upon the cumulative impacts analysis for this individual project. There's no way practically to enforce a helicopter overflight, because by the time somebody gets out to try and get the number off the helicopter or the piece of equipment or figure out where it's landing, it's gone. And so it's been very challenging. A number of people have relayed to me their difficulties in literally trying to chase down helicopters, figuring out where they're landing. So we'd suggest and request that the county establish a helicopter hotline, complaint hotline, and that there be a process so that there's rapid deployment. Ordinarily, the Federal Aviation Administration has procedures and hotline numbers themselves for complaints. I actually posted that information to the public comment section. I'm sure that it's up on the website now as associated with this. But I think that the county ought to follow suit and have staff available to respond quickly when there are complaints of this nature, because it's a problem that obviously has huge significance. It's not been adequately captured through the county's regulatory process to date. And so there needs to be some way to deal with that. The last piece that I'd ask, since we are taking this continuance and the applicant has requested the opportunity to respond to comments with a negative declaration, we would request that staff file written responses to the comments that are submitted to the negative declaration, as well as the ones that have been submitted to your commission for today's hearing, as a means of elevating and evolving the public discussion about these issues. I have some concerns about Mr. Nesbitt reaching out to a lot of individuals. I've talked to people that have been intimidated or felt uncomfortable having Mr. Nesbitt ask them to meet specifically and individually on this project. So I do think that there is a need for additional development of the substantive issues here, and I'd ask your commission's engagement in creation of a forum that's appropriate for that, and to engage the public, the staff, in responding to the public's concerns. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chisholm. Let's see what else we have. Kevin Snow, do you want to speak to this issue of a continuance?
Not to the continuance, no.
Okay, so there's no one else who wants to speak to the issue of the continuance, is that right?
Chair, there is. There's no more speaker
There
slips.
is.
So Mr.
There's no more
Wilbur does.
We've run out of speaker slips
Yep.
after just 4 of them?
I don't know, whatever, anyway. So he's up there anyway, okay.
Okay, let's work on that.
Mr. Chair,
I
members of
know
the
you.
commission.
Mr. Wilbrandt.
Chip Wilbrandt, we represent a number of the neighbors to this project. Speaking just to the continuance, I would urge that you choose a date that is after you all are able to get through what I expect to be a very busy summer schedule, including probably a cannabis ordinance update and lots of appeals. In the meantime, I would ask you to urge staff to look at enforcement on this property. As I understand, the helicopter pad is already there. A helicopter garage is already there. A polo field is already there. This is a property where this is just the worst example I can think of in Santa Barbara County of doing what you want and then asking for forgiveness and running the neighbors just out of time, money, everything else, making a miserable neighborhood of a wonderful neighborhood. So please, extend this until there is a time for you all to look at this comprehensively and urge your staff to shut down the violations in the meantime. Thank you.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
What makes you so naive is to think that we're going to get through cannabis and oil by the end of this year? You don't have to answer that. We're into rhetorical questions.
I think we're in the realm of rhetoric, but again, I don't think that you should be rushing to provide for somebody who has a long history of violation. Thank you.
So we'll close public comment on this particular issue. Planning commissioners, do you have any comments to make in deliberations? Commissioner Cooney.
I have a deliberation and a question. I think I heard earlier that the applicant was told.
And this is Commissioner Blau, for everyone's sake. Yes, Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, thank you. I heard earlier that in an ag zone property, that one wasn't necessary. Could staff tell me if that's true or not? Because that's the issue of, if there are 11 other helipads out there, are they all in violation as well, or is it true that you didn't need one for an ag property?
Ms. Harmon, could you answer that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, if other helicopters are landing in that area, then it is without permits. Then we have received a number of complaints. It's difficult to enforce and to actually see where they are all landing. So that ultimately the violations are closed, the helicopters go away. However, at one point, Mr. Nesbitt might have been told, I believe he said maybe years ago, that no permit is needed. However, a conditional use permit is required in the Ag Zone District for a helistop.
And it has been that way for how long?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I am not sure. We can look into that and give you that information. I'm not sure if it changed at one point. As far as I know, the time I have been here, about 3 years, it's been required. Again, in the Ag 1 Zone District.
Okay, because my concern is that if this is legal non-conforming use of the property, I would just like to know that. I support the continuance for obvious reasons, but when it comes back before us at some point in time, and for the benefit of all the neighbors that are there now, we need to figure out if that's a legal non-conforming use or that it's been illegal for 30 or 40 years.
All right, you're up to bat, Commissioner Cooney.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
You
Chair.
like the baseball analogy?
I do. I made a motion prior to public comment, and once all the commissioners ask the questions they have, I'm prepared to reintroduce the same motion to grant the continuance. I would offer the date of September 25, as mentioned by Mr. Shatillo. It's past any kind of absences caused by vacation or otherwise, and I think we need to give the community as much notice as possible of the hearing. On the other hand, we've all prepared for this hearing. I'd like it not to go so far that we have to completely prepare again. So September 25 is at the far reach of that reasonable area, and so my motion now would be to continue this matter to the 25th of September.
I'll second that.
And did you have any other comments, Commissioner Brown? Okay, I have some comments. Mr. Freeney, did you have any comments?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
My comments are this, is a number of things. We spent a lot of time preparing for this hearing today. I think the commissioners are going to find that their time to prepare for this hearing in September is going to be severely constrained because we're going to be hit so hard by so many cannabis hearings. And I'm concerned about that. They may not be scheduled now, but they will be. And I'm very disappointed to spend the time to prepare for this and then get a last-minute request for a continuance. I think that's disrespectful and doesn't do much to win over votes. One problem I see with this project is this, in a sense, testimony and admission of illegal use, and will that continue in any respect or start up again in any respect between now and September? And it's disappointing to me that our planning process doesn't take that into account. Finally, I was hoping at least by a hearing today, whether it was partial or full or whatever, we could give guidance to staff as to what things we might think are missing in the staff report and the environmental document. I, for one, am very disappointed that there is no treatment in the reports, as far as I can tell, about the impact of this helicopter activity on the monarch butterflies and bird populations in the environmental sensitive habitats. And I'll even go on to say I'm disappointed that there's no movement from the environmental community asking those questions, but here we are. So if we have any kind of a hearing, we can address those things and give staff guidance on what we'd like to know. And it may happen we have a hearing in September and we're still asking those questions and it gets continued again. I don't know. I think we should have a hearing and go forward. But if there's no other deliberations, Mr. Villalobos, why don't you conduct the roll call vote?
Commissioner Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney.
Aye.
Commissioner Farini.
Aye.
Commissioner Blau.
Aye.
Chair Park.
No. The
Motion
motion
pa-
is carried.
4-1.
Let's go on to the second item, if you will. While folks are leaving and people are getting set, we'll take a 5-minute break. and we are convening. Thank you.
Shall I?
Mr. Villalobos, will you please read item number 2 into the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on a request of Poe Wang to consider case numbers 19 APL 6, appeal filed on May 2nd, 2019, to appeal the director's approval of case number 18 CDP 62.
Do we have any ex parte or visit disclosures by planning commissioners on this item? Hearing none, we'll move on. Do we have a staff report?
Good morning, Chair Park and Commissioners. My name is Kiara Ristig, and I will be presenting this Appeal 19 APL 6 of the Director's approval of the 9 Tennis Court Project 18 CDP 62. The project is located at 1221 Lomita Lane, north of the Highway 101 in the Carpinteria area. Surrounding development consists of single-family dwellings and agriculture. There we go. Here is a more detailed aerial view of the parcel showing the existing single-family dwelling and neighboring properties. This map shows the zoning of the surrounding area, including the EDRN, surrounding agricultural zoned land, and the incorporated city of Carpinteria. Here's the overall site plan for the project. The project has proposed a change in previously approved grading to elevate the tennis court and accessory structures by approximately 2.5 feet. The associated 6-foot retaining wall at the southern end of the tennis court and the 10-foot fencing surrounding the tennis court is proposed to remain. There has been proposed the addition of a smaller 115-foot long retaining planter wall ranging in height from 1 to 4 feet between the tennis court retaining wall and the property line. The 6-foot retaining wall at the southern end of the property has also been proposed to be extended 50 feet to the east of the tennis court. The retention basins that were approved under the previous CDP have been proposed to be moved largely to the west of the existing tennis court, of the partially graded but previously approved tennis court, closer to the western property line. Grading has also been proposed next to the driveway to increase the flat area surrounding it. Total grading calculation for the project, including work done on the previous CDP, include 1,050 cubic yards of cut and fill and import of approximately 500 cubic yards of material. Here's some background on the project. 18 CDP 9 was approved on March 30th, 2018, and approved the construction of a tennis court, retaining walls, surrounding fencing, retention basins, accessory structures, and other minor site work. In October 2018, the grading inspector did a site inspection and confirmed that the tennis court did not conform with the approved grading plan, and that roughly 500 cubic yards of soil had been imported, not in conformance with the grading plan. The applicant submitted an application, 18 CDP 62, to allow as-built, partially as-built, and also to be constructed changes to the original permit. The director approved this permit, 18 CDP 62, on April 22nd, 2019, and a timely appeal was filed on May 2nd. Appeal issue number 1. The property owner has shown a continued pattern of unauthorized construction, most recently the import of excess fill not consistent with the approved permit. The site was inspected by the county grading inspector in October, and a stop work order was issued. Since then, no work has been allowed to be continued on the site. The owner applied for a permit to allow for as-built work and other changes on the site, and approval of 18 CDP 62 would bring the as-built project into compliance and allowed the project to be completed. Appeal issue 2. Water and dirt washed off onto adjacent properties during winter 2019. The neighborhood will suffer further unless the applicant gets an approved water and soil retention plan. There, like I mentioned earlier, in October 2018, there was a stop work order placed on the project. In coordination with the county grading inspector, the applicant installed erosion control measures. Upon completion of all project components, the retention basins, revegetation, etc., it will retain runoff created by new impervious surfaces as shown by the calculations prepared by the engineer. A stormwater management and erosion control plan has also been designed by the engineer and is part of the approved plans for the project and will be reviewed by the grading inspector when they apply for a grading permit. Sorry. Appeal issue 3. An increase in retaining wall height to build the tennis court will affect the character of the neighborhood, potential for the wall and dirt to be damaged during an earthquake, and the potential negative impacts to neighboring properties. The southern retaining wall would remain 6.5 feet tall with an increase in overall elevation of 2.5 feet as a result of grading. The retaining wall is outside of the setback as previously and currently proposed, and the retaining walls will be required to meet building code and will be verified in the fields that they're meeting all of the required standards. The analysis of the project is that the tennis court, accessory structures, and the proposed changes to the project are consistent with the residential character of the area and are accessory and customarily incidental to the current use as a single-family dwelling. The project meets all applicable Article 2 coastal zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan requirements. The project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to sections 15303 and 15304, which exempt new construction or conversion of small structures, such as the tennis court and retaining walls, and applies to the alterations in the condition of land which does not result in the removal of healthy, mature scenic trees. Staff's recommended actions is that the commission deny the appeal, case number 19 APL 6, make the required findings for approval of the project specified in Attachment A of the staff report, including California Environmental Quality Act findings, determine that the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to CEQA sections 15303 and 15304 included as Attachment C. And that concludes staff presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Ristig. Does anyone have questions of staff on this project?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Brown?
Ms. Ristig, so the grading inspector site inspection was done when? Did he make 2 visits, or was there 1 visit done? Because there was stop work order, and then there was another one done for the dirt.
So
explain that.
My understanding is that the neighbor, the appellant, called in to the grading inspector saying that he had noticed some work that he didn't think was part of the scope of the project. And so the grading inspector went out and did a site visit and confirmed that the grading plan was not in conformance, and he consequently issued a stop work order. He also confirmed that even without a call from the neighbor, it was approximately 1 week away from when he would have been out on the site for his routine grading inspection.
Okay, so both of these issues about the erosion control were under the same stop work order?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
As far as I know. Yeah.
Oh, okay. It wasn't one visit by the grading inspector and then there was a follow-on. It was all done at the same time.
I think it was done at the same time. I do know that the grading inspector did go out on subsequent visits to make sure that all of the erosion control measures had been applied properly.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions from our Santa Maria branch?
No, sir. Good presentation.
All right. Then let's move on to the appellant's presentation. Because this is appeal, we start with the appellant's presentation. And will you identify yourself for the record and also tell us approximately how long you intend to take?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Park and Commissioners. I plan to take about 15 minutes to go through the presentation real quick and then answer any questions you may have. Okay. I've been a Carpinteria resident for over 39 years, so I grew up in Carpinteria. Okay, thank you. And so for me...
And just identify yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Po Wang. I'm the appellant.
Great.
Great. So I did put a quick slide deck together in terms of having you all understand my journey with... Here, it's not moving forward. Oh, there we go. Okay, so there's a few issues I want to cover, right? One is Mr. Nee systemically and systematically ignores county permit limits. This is not the first time we've been down this
I apologize.
journey.
Can I just interrupt you
Sure.
for a minute? Do you mind just moving the mic closer to your
Sure.
mouth so we can
Here we
hear you
go.
better? Thank you.
Is that better? Okay. The second point is he disregards for neighborhood safety, okay, which I'll show you in the slide. He drastically changes the landscape and all his projects above and beyond the original permit. And as we discovered, the percolation of what they have done currently does not work in terms of our soil being absorbent, because it's happened in the second situation that we're in of mud coming down to the properties below. And then he added 5 inches of topsoil on our property because of the runoff, because of the silt control that the county asked him to put. It didn't work, so the county asked him to do more work, and it still did not work to stop the soil runoff. Okay? So this is back in 2002 when he only got a gate permit. This is what our property generally looked like in terms of the general landscape and the non-change of the work. He did the work over the long weekend when I called and the county office was closed. He imported that much soil onto the property without any drainage, okay? And what happened was he actually increased probably 90 cubic yards is what's not required permit. I think he imported about 200 cubic yards without a permit. As a result, that's what it looks like afterwards without any drainage, okay? As subsequent, a rain happened a month before that. My whole wall came down. All the soil came down through our property, knocked down the wall. The soil went onto our neighbor's property, which is below, which Mr. Gaskin was here earlier. So we had to clean it all ourselves without any apologies or whatsoever from our neighbor up top. Okay? And so this is the initial view before the tennis court, right? So this is what it looked like a few years back, and this is what the current cut and fill looks like, okay, with the extra 500 cubic yards that he decided to do without any oversight from the planning commission or the grading inspector, okay? And this is what he's asking for, additional 15.9 feet out of the driveway, okay? Again, it's bringing us closer to our property line, again, with disregard of what our properties look like and the neighborhood impact. Okay, and so this shows what Ms. Rishtik showed in terms of the 59 feet increase of where the current driveway is and where their new driveway is going to be. Okay, and then this is the original landscape of what we had, and this is what it looks like brand new. Okay, our fence is 6 feet high. Okay, we don't have an issue with his original permit at all. Okay, whatever they want to do on their property, I'm good. But when he increases it 2.5 feet without any type of asking the neighborhood, more importantly, to get a safety inspection or approval from a permit, and illegally and unfairly goes and does the work again, until I actually had to call the grading inspector to ensure that, why are there 30 trucks passing a day right down our road? The people who lived in Lagunitas asked us what's going up on there. Right? So he was trying to finish the work as soon as possible and then submit another permit. Okay, and so this is what this, at least the 500 cubic yard looks like in addition. Okay, and then again, as I mentioned, 30 trucks a day for a week on a private road. Okay, and then additionally, I'm sorry, it's 2.5 feet. Okay, that he decided to add without any consent from the grading permit process. Okay, and this is what it looks like. Okay, they put the silt in, which is actually on my property. Okay, and all the runoff of the soil. Okay, and this is what it looks like on the back inside of the 3 houses. Okay, that lives in the back. He did not once go and actually help the neighborhoods and figure out, okay, all this runoff, how do I help you guys clean it up? It's been 5 inches of soil added to my property. Okay, and so if the soil is supposed to at least absorb, the rains weren't that big, okay, this past winter, but yet it didn't absorb, and we had huge runoffs, okay, in our neighborhood. So the impact to our neighborhood is very high. It's not that it will fit into our neighborhood. Okay, and I dug a hole with the top swell and where that swell looks like, right in the corner where I just showed the picture. Okay, again, it's at least 5 inches of additional swell on my yard. Okay, and this is what our backyard looks like now with the additional 2.5 feet. My contention isn't about his original permit. It's about him taking the liberty of adding 2.5 feet and then deciding to add another 15.9 feet of his driveway towards our property and disregard for the neighborhood's safety and character. Okay, thank you very much.
I have a question.
Yes, Commissioner Brown.
This photo is current?
Yes, it was taken yesterday.
Okay, so this black line, it looks like it's plastic material or sheeting of some sort.
Yeah, that's the silt that the county,
that's
Tony Burnett, which is actually on my property. Again, the disregard for property lines is amazing to me.
Wait a minute, so this is on, it looks like, this says new, let me see. Just a minute. It looks like it's on, whose property is this on? This should be on his property.
But it's actually on my property because I have 6 inches after the fence. So
did you
the
put
silt.
that?
No, he had to put the silt down because the county actually asked him to put the silt down because of the rain that's coming.
But wouldn't they do that on his property?
Yeah, I
not
would
yours?
think so too, but he didn't. But that's, yep.
So, okay, all right.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not here to, that wasn't my contention. My contention is, yeah, the safety aspect.
No, I get it, but I don't understand.
Yeah.
If that's there, is that a permanent solution or what?
I have no idea. The
Okay.
grading inspectors can answer that.
Mr. Wang, I just wanted you to clarify your remarks on
Sure.
one point. When you spoke about soil being brought in a 2-foot change, 2.5-foot change, you're talking about in the vertical dimension? That went up?
Exactly, yep.
And then when you spoke about the driveway and you mentioned 15.9 feet, I took that to mean that out.
Exactly.
Horizontal
Yep.
dimension.
Yep. So that's part of his new permit, right? That he decided to actually add on to this illegal initial process that he decided to take on.
Okay. Any other questions of Mr. Wang? Commissioner Cooney.
Just to clarify that last comment, the driveway issue, separate and apart from adding the dirt, has that already been done, or is the permit which he sought and received inclusive of that driveway expansion?
I would probably leave that to the grading inspector because at this point, we don't know what was done and what wasn't, and that's what's scary about this whole process, is that he just decides to do the work and then apply for a permit in the middle, which isn't what the process should be, right? And so I can't answer that, to be honest with you. I assume it hasn't, just because we haven't seen it 15 foot. How much of that work's been done, I don't know.
So you haven't seen the driveway move toward your house to this point?
I think there was some dirt put into that area, but I can't tell you how much, right? So from that standpoint, I don't know. My request is that it gets removed and put back to the original permit. That's our request from our neighbors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have an applicant presentation? And will you state your name for the record?
Yes. My name is Wayne Nee. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair and the commissioners. I have been in Santa Barbara County for over 4 decades. I grew up here, went through the school system. First, what I like to say is the appellant is very, very good at distorting things. I just like to take a couple of minutes to separate the facts from the fiction. Okay? I guess my presentation is not projectable. It's a 40-page that you guys probably had seeing. First of all, we have a lot of community member support for this project. And I'd like to just come out and say, yes, it is my ignorance. It is my mistake that along the field changes, we were working on, my engineer has been working on the drawings, and we got everything completed at end of October. And in the meantime, we had invited inspectors in to do progress report, do progress check, along with soil engineers for no less than 30 times during the 6-week period. So everybody is on board as to what we're doing. But it is my final call, my mistake, and I didn't want to let the grader go, and I say, we're doing a revision, and we're going to submit that as the minute that the plans are done. And but when the plans are done, when we talked to the inspector, he said, you're going to need to bring this, you're going to need to stop work and bring this in. And we did exactly that on October 31st, and I brought the plans in, and that's when we applied for a new CDP, because at that point, I was told on the by the counter personnel that it's going to be, you can't do a revision, but you have to do a new CDP. And I said, fine, whatever that I need to do. So that is my mistake. And besides that, when appellants say systematically ignore county permit limits, and that is not quite true, okay? The only other time when again, let's do my ignorance back in 2006 when we had some dry rot in the house. The house was only finished in '99, but we had some dry rot, so contractor issues. And we repaired the dry rot. And then when gentlemen show up and say, you need a permit for that. Okay, we stopped work, and I came in and got a permit. And that's all on the permit history. Since I don't have the overhead projection, if the commissioners have my submittal, then in the exhibits, you will be able to see my permit history. And you will see that's the only item that I have. And again, I have no problem admitting to mistakes, and I'm sorry for that, and I'm also paying for that. So the most important thing is the appellant's reality stretching accusations are not supported by facts. And I'm only going to spend a few minutes, so we'll just go through this in real broad strokes, and if people need detail, we have it. On the second item on the opposition, disregard of neighborhood safety, absolute false. We always follow the rules, and we always think of what the neighbors might think. For example, appellant himself has 150 feet of structure, concrete structure, on top of the neighborhood gas main line. And again, that's in the exhibits that I have. The gas company came out, they put a yellow flag on the entire 150 feet of concrete structure, wall, concrete footings sits directly on top of the main line. So I have a lot of concern with the safety of that. And I don't know if Mr. Gaskins, who is just below him, feel the same way or not. I don't want to speak for him. But I understand when I research on gas line explosion, this is not so that's the second point. And drastic change of landscape, again, it's a matter of opinion. I disagree. Basically we're turning weeds to sustainable landscaping. We tried to build this tennis court for 20 years. We own this property since January 1999, when my kids are very young. And we were not able to get this done until they all left home for school and one graduated. So, but I disagree with that. And percolation does not work without proper sewage. Again, I disagree. It's false because the proposed comprehensive drainage plan designed by Lewis Engineering and was also mentioned in the staff report. That is completely comprehensive. As a matter of fact, the natural flow of the historical flow of water is going from northeast to southwest. And when this is done, the flow is going to be greatly reduced because of the additional retention rain gardens, as they call it. The retention centers will pick up all of the water and raindrop, and then also will drain properly. So, but when the work is stopped, you don't have drainage system, and you don't have the retaining basin. Lastly, the appellant said they added 5 inches. That we put 5 inches of topsoil on their property. Again, that is absolutely false. If you look at page 15 of the page 18 on their presentation, you will see this is on. I don't know if do the commissioners have that page? If not, I'd be happy to pass this along, because it's kind of important to look at this.
We did receive that, Mr. Nee, but the pages aren't numbered on our copies.
So it's a 3-page from the last, from the appellant's opposition. 3-page from the last, and it looked like this.
What is the title of the
The title
page?
says flood damage after rain and county
Requested silt.
Okay, so if we look at the picture, I'll wait until everybody gets there.
Okay, it's 3 pages from the
Last.
from the end of the presentation. It's a photograph, and the title to the photograph is "Flood Damage After Rain and County Requested Silt." Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So the picture on the left. Okay, I'm sorry. So the picture on the left clearly depicts the silt fence is on my side of the property, and the chain link fence is the property line. You know, I don't know anything about this business about the chain link fence is 6 inches on their side. I just did. As a matter of fact, we have it here. We have topography done on our plan for this project. It shows the fence is not completely on their side. Okay, so again, it's just facts and fiction. And here we just really have to decipher this, or it's really, really frustrating and misleading and without merit. So we can see the bottom, there is no bottom rail on the fence, but there is a bottom wire on the fence. And that bottom wire, you can clearly see the entirety of the bottom wire. And it's still about, I say 3-4 inches above ground, or at least I would say 3 inches above ground. So if, unless our silt just form balls of their own and jump over the fence to Wang's property, there's no other way. The silt has to come from the bottom of the fence to go through. So the 5-inch topsoil added to their property, that's Greek mythology. It's outright lies. Here you can clearly see this. There's not even 1 inch that went over based on his picture, not my picture. Okay? So I just want to point that out. And as far as, and if we go to page 17, or second page from the last, very second page from the last. It looked like this of his presentation.
And title of this page is added 5 inches of topsoil on our
Yes, sir.
property?
Yes, sir. Again, you can clearly see when it rains, there's no dirt that's coming from my side because if you look at the pictures that I have, so the dirt does shift around because his property line from us is higher than the rest of his lot, okay? Because that's how the terrain is. So there is a little bit of slushy stuff on top, and I don't believe it's from our side. But even if it is, it's minimal. But look how low that he dug down to show this. There is no 5 inches. And if there is topsoil coming over, they had to go over underneath the fence or at the bottom of the fence. There's no other way for silt to go over that I know of. So again, it's just facts and fiction. And also, after I received his this yesterday, I had some pictures, but I didn't include them in my presentation. And I don't know if they're allowed for you guys to see or not, but it basically just shows how 150 sandbags we put down, $4,000 of coconut blankets that we put down. It's not possible to have any of the stuff go over. On the very corner where Mr. Inspector Bonnet let me know, and we immediately went out, we took care of everything. And when we went out there, I don't know when the pictures were taken by Mr. Wang, because none of his pictures are dated. Most of my pictures are dated. So it could be historical. We have and when we went out there the same day, the same morning when we heard from Tony, we went out there, and there were no silt on the road like Mr. Wang's picture depicts. Absolutely none. So just want to point that out so we're not all confused. And again, since we have that Exhibit 6 on showing, then we can address the northern neighbor who had said we're not going to have retaining walls on the north side, which is completely false. And again, if I'm not saying anything, if I'm not saying things correctly, Kiara, please correct me, and also my engineer can too. So basically, we have the wall. We reduced the 6 feet retaining wall on the north side to 4 feet because we increased the elevation of the court from the ground up by 2 feet. So that's why that's 6 feet. And then I remember in their complaint, they say there's no walls, which is not true. And then the retaining basin is in front of their property. But if we were to look at Exhibit 6, we can see the retaining basin, the 2 big ones, are on the west side. They are actually on another neighbor, the 22 feet from another neighbor's property line. So they are completely, they have nothing to do with the northern neighbor. I guess she signed an email or a letter. So, and lastly is the question of the driveways. And then here I would like, if I may, have Kiara confirm the driveway from original plan to the revision with the field changes stayed exactly the same place, did not get increased by 1 inch, okay? Not 1 inch. So again, it's about facts and fiction. Mr. Wang's driveway, he has 2 driveways. They both are 10 feet or less from the neighbors, from Mr. Gaskin's side and from our side. By the time we're done, our driveway will still be more than 45 feet away from our property line with Mr. Wang. And the driveway did not get expanded. Okay, on the revision, we did increase the flat area. We did push out the flat area by a number of feet so that it can be a grandkid's garden. You know, we're looking forward. But other than that, the driveway stays exactly the same. I think it's unfortunate we keep on having to clarify between facts and fiction, but that is.
Are you about ready to wrap up, Mr. Nee?
I am, and I just would like to call my engineer up to give a little 3 minute, and then also answer any question you may have.
Can I
Thank
just
you.
ask him a question? Okay.
Oh yeah, and if you have
Mr.
any
Brown
question for
has
me,
a question.
please.
Yeah,
you, Mr.
you know,
Nee.
I guess this is the third, I don't know, the flood damage after rain and county requested silt. So it looks like on the photo to the right, there was some runoff onto the property because it looks like there must be water lines that were buried there at the upper right-hand side.
Okay, I'm sorry, which
Well,
page?
it's that same page, the flood damage after rain and county requested silt.
okay,
But
okay.
I'm just, this is my opportunity
Yes.
to ask you a question. So
Yes,
if you
yes.
just wait.
Yes.
So it does look like, so this black plastic, I don't know what it is, it's a silt fence? I'm not
Correct.
sure what it is. So it does look like there was some runoff. So if there was runoff, I don't know when it occurred, but the silt fencing must have occurred after the runoff. Have you made any arrangements to remove the silt that's
Yes, as a matter of fact, here's what we did. And again, I don't have this because I just got this yesterday. So on March 12th, 2019, 9:30 a.m., this is when we had installed more sandbags, and that's what they look like. I don't know if you guys can see against the
Oh, we don't get.
against the soil fence. No, you won't be able to find it there. And again, it's my, because I only responded to his yesterday. And then you can clearly see, I can pass this around if I'm allowed, that the grass on Mr. Wang's side, there's absolutely no silt on the grass. Zero. May I bring it so you guys can look?
The proper way to show us that picture is to give it to our clerk, and he will put it on the overlay. Sure.
Okay, did you have anything else to add? Otherwise, let's get your engineer up here.
Okay.
Okay, and, all right. Engineer?
Yeah, so just one last thing, but please, one last thing is, we try to have this tennis court, to build this tennis court for 20 years, but unfortunately we were not able to. But we would really like to get it done, if not for our kids, but for our grandkids. Thank you.
Both you and Mr. Wang will have an opportunity for rebuttal. Mr. Wang will have more time because you've taken more time. Okay, and your name is ma'am?
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Thank you for being here. My name is Jane Montague. I'm a licensed civil engineer in the state of California. And I would ask staff to put up the staff report attachment that shows the grading plan towards the end. I think it's attachment C or D. I just have a couple of brief points I'd like to make. This project was permitted originally through all the proper departments at the County of Santa Barbara, also with its conditional development permit as well, and its grading permit. There was a pre-construction meeting held. All were in attendance, including the county inspector, licensed contractors, and myself. The project proceeded with inspections completely by the book. There was a point in the construction when there were field changes, okay? Not uncommon for any construction project, especially large grading projects, to have field changes. Thoughts occur as you get the work done, so you examine those ideas and you put them forth into action, or you put them forth into question with the governing agency. In this case, the questions were put forth to the governing agency, who recommended that a new coastal development permit be applied for, which is exactly what was done. The unfortunate part is the timing of the year. So when a stop work occurs in October, which is at the very crest or cusp of a rainy season, stop work means stop work. You can't move any more dirt. You can, of course, put in your erosion control devices, which was done. But they're only as good as plastic sheeting, straw bales, coconut rolls, things like this. So we had a unusually prolonged rainy season this year, and I'm sure that was the cause, in addition to being stopped in construction at this, in conjunction with those two events, that erosion's going to occur. In the ultimate build-out of the project will have all of the functioning erosion control measures that are post-construction, such as the detention basins, final landscape planting, all slopes planted. All of that will occur eventually when the job is allowed to be finished. The overall design of the project has a couple of simple directives to it. One is to construct a tennis court, and the other was to provide a little bit more turnaround space from the garage, because it was a very narrow driveway in front of the garage originally. This change in the design is, as Mr. Nee said, no different than the original design in terms of the addition of the pavers there that are in front of the garage that you can see in the shaded area. So that's identical to the previous permitted grading plan. The tennis court is in the same exact location. These accessory structures are in the same exact location. What has changed is that the tennis court was raised a couple of feet to effect a more gentle walkway from the departure point at the driveway to the entrance point at the middle of the tennis court. Because as you can tell by all the contours on the plan, there's a lot of slope to this property. And even as it stands now, there's at least 10 feet of drop from the house down to the tennis court. And as I've been instructed by Mr. and Mrs. Nee, they would like to age in place. This is a place they would like to be able to go around on their wheelchairs. So a more gentle grade down to the tennis court was the directive. I'd also like to point out, if we could look at the next sheet that shows the cross sections. So if you look at the middle cross section, which is section, I think 3.3, yeah, it's the long one from left to right. You can see how much from one side of the Nee property to the other side, the natural grade drops. And the tennis court is about a dead-on split from the bottom side, the bottom elevation of the natural grade at the south property line, to the natural grade at the upper side, which is about a 20-foot drop. Now the tennis court is about at the 10-foot midpoint. So it drops 10 feet from its upper side, and it's above 10 feet at its lower side. And that is a typical design tactic in engineering to balance the earthwork. And it also, in this case, makes the most balanced retaining wall situation. The addition of the planter wall on the south side is to effect a planter, not I wouldn't say box, but a strip where trees and shrubs and things to help obscure from any southern views the structure of the wall that's rising up out of the ground there. So that was a sensitivity effort there. If we could go back to the previous slide, please. Thank you. So the other change in the design between the earlier coastal development permit and this one is the movement of the detention basins to the west side of the tennis court. The natural drainage of this whole valley is more from the northeast to the southwest, as Mr. Nee had pointed out. So the low point on this property is at its west line. So it made sense for all of the water, the site water, especially the developed water, developed mean which comes from a developed area such as an impervious surface, is being placed along the west line. And it is detained in a series of cascading detention basins, which will both retain silt and retain volume of water to mitigate any increase from the development. And the discharge becomes to the very southern and westernmost corner, which is the low point of the property. When that is, thank you very much. Yeah, and when this is all in effect, you can see the rock riprap that will be at that corner, which will serve as a spillway and a detention for all of the, or as much as we can hope nature will allow us to detain of the silts that are carried. So the fact that there was a large silt problem in the rainy season was a very unfortunate event, but the stop work order and the stopping of the construction and the timing just really wasn't the best for being able to finish the project and put in all the erosion control facilities. Let's see. That was really all the comments I had to make. If anybody has any questions, I'd be available.
I do.
Thank
I have
you.
a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Go ahead, Commissioner Bob.
Yeah, what was the original quantity of dirt that was to be placed on the property with the first permit?
When you say to be placed on the property, do you mean moved on the property or imported to the property?
Imported to the property.
Originally, there was export. So
So we end up with 500 cubic yards of fill? I'm hearing that we have 500 cubic yards of fill that wasn't a part of the original permit process.
The original permit
that
process
correct?
had 600 yards of export, so trucking would have occurred in either case. In the original, the balance didn't occur in terms of cut and fill, so there was a 600-yard overage approximately, and in the new design there was a 500-yard underage, if you would call it that. So there was an import of soil to be placed.
Well, I guess my concern is, I don't know how you, I understand having field changes when you're doing a project, but you're telling me that we missed this one by 1,100 cubic yards? Originally, it was 600 yards of cut and export, and then we ended up with 500 cubic yards of fill.
That's right. It wasn't something that was missed, though. It was something that was a field change and was discussed with county staff along the way, and then the proper procedures carried out afterward.
Okay, I'm having a tough time wrestling with that fact. I mean, I am a contractor, and I understand, changes in the field, but that's like a huge mistake. And the other thing was, you didn't have wattles and other protections once the stop order was there. I mean, under the new stormwater rules, you're not allowed to have silt and that kind of leave your property. It needs to be detained on your property or filtered. I don't get that, how that didn't occur.
I am not privy to the activity during construction. I was not present there. The placement of erosion control facilities is to the knowledge of the general contractor, the grading contractor, and the property owner and the inspector.
Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
Commissioner Brown?
Yeah, I have a question about your explanation of, I guess this is a detention basin where the water is going to run down and flow here, right? And be captured here? Is that how you described it?
It's captured in all three of yes, where
Okay.
the top one, middle one,
Okay.
and bottom one, yes.
And then, but you indicated water would be flowing down this way. What is flowing here? Silt, and silt is going to be captured here? Explain to me.
Okay, so ultimately, we wouldn't expect silt to be leaving the property.
Right.
That's the design intent, and that's why all grading ordinances require heavy vegetation on all sloped areas. And so what we would be expecting to see there is clear water in the end, in a rainstorm. So the tennis court itself drains to the northernmost of those three basins, the largest, which also intercepts water from the north, from properties to the north, and from the slope above, and even from a little bit from a small slab that's to the northeast corner of the tennis court there. So the larger basin is sized in volume to take a quantity of water that would mitigate the increase due to the impervious surface. It goes from basin to basin to basin because the topography is changing there. So the design intent is to have it look like a natural water course back there. Eventually it'll be planted with trees. There's a lot of rock to affect sort of a stream bed look back there. And it also brings the water from just casually spilling over the north-south property line there, but concentrates it to the rear, so it's furthest away from neighboring structures.
So there, whatever flow there is, you indicated there's something here to capture it down in this corner, correct?
Yes.
Right here. And then where does it go from there?
It leaves the property.
The water leaves the property to go down to the southern property line?
It
Go
le-
down to this property here?
To both properties, which is the natural direction of the water before. All of that area is lower than the street, so the water maintains its original direction.
So how does it do that? I mean, it just naturally is just going to flow from here to here to here, so...
Yes, so in the very bottom corner, if you want
Right
to
down
put
here.
the pointer there,
Yeah.
you can see a strip, and right below where you have the red light, it
Right.
says level area, level line. I can't quite read it from here.
Okay, I can't.
So the water is to come down and be spread by sort of what we would call a spillway in rock. And it creates, another term for it in engineering is a check dam, a place to spread the water back out to affect the way it was originally. The water, that is the low point even today or even previous to the grading. All of the water came from the northeast to the southwest corner. And so we're mimicking the same location and mitigating it by slowing it down through the basins and then spreading it out with the rocks.
So what you're telling me is that historic flow from this property was in this direction, right?
That's correct.
So if any change, the flow can't be increased, it just has to be what the historic amount was. Is that,
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yes, with no increase and no concentration are our directives in drainage. Mhm.
So what is here is it's not dependent upon any landscaping. Is this what this is, landscaping? Okay, this is rock.
It's rock, so that's
Okay.
a kind of landscaping.
Oh, okay. Hard story. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, thank you. Let's move on to public comment.
you.
I have 2 speaker slips. Michelle Caswell. Michelle, are you here? There you go. And you probably heard earlier, we're going to limit our public comment to 3 minutes apiece.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
I'll try. Good morning. I am the neighbor to the north of Mr. Nee that he referenced. We haven't had much attention here today, the north property line. I had submitted a letter with this appeal stating my concerns, and my concern is as such on the southern side that the drainage issue. From what I can tell, standing on our property side, there is a vertical cut of at least the length of the tennis court, and it appears to be approximately 15-foot drop straight.
We're going to interrupt you for a moment so you can use the pointer.
Oh, okay.
Put the red
Where
dot
is it?
on the...
Okay, all right, so,
Oops, you want to...
well, let's see, is there a, yeah.
There we
Okay,
go.
so here, this width, our property's up here, this width was cut with the soil removed. It's a straight vertical cut of approximately 15 feet down. There is no proposed, to my knowledge, retaining wall or anything that is going to support that soil of that massive wall. So we have a retaining wall around the tennis court, but that is several feet from the actual cut in the wall. A 2-foot retaining wall at the tennis court is not going to hold 15 feet worth of dirt. Vertical feet of dirt, and linear, I'm guessing around 50, 75 feet. So,
Was that cut the product of this project?
yes, yes, this is something that, that was done. I am not on the property full-time. It is my family's property. My father passed away 2 years ago, and my mother is very ill, and she still lives on the property. And I live out of the area, but I come up frequently to maintain the property for her. It was, as Mr. Wang said, trucks and trucks and trucks bringing in soil, taking out soil. When I went one day, that cut was made. I don't see anything that is going to, in this proposal, hold that soil up and not cause either erosion or the waterfall off of that, again, into his property, which would drain down to the southern border of the property. The concern here is with the change. As you saw in the aerial shot, the community up there is agricultural, a lot of avocados, and single-family homes on acre parcels. There are no walls or great fences surrounding any of the properties. This proposal, especially with a change of 2.5 feet in elevation, will dramatically change the aesthetics of the community. It doesn't conform with anything else in the area. But the main concern really is, again, our northern side and the southern side, the drainage on it. And just to clear something up, I back in February of 2018, when the first notice went up, I met with Tammy Weber, the development review planner for the county, with Mr. Nee and with his engineer on the project prior to the first one being approved. And because I wanted to understand, I'm not good at reading these, so I wanted to, on the property, look at it and have them explain, exactly what was going on. And I went through great measures to make sure that I knew everything that was going to be done and that it was agreed upon, and so there wouldn't have to be an appeal. And that's what Mr. Nee represented, was his initial plan. And then all of a sudden, he claims ignorance to not filing for a new permit or a change in plan. That's incorrect. If you look at historically, he's been through this process before. He just did what he wanted. And the concern is that this is going to continue. That we don't know. We don't know what he's going to do next based on history. We don't know if it's going to destabilize our property. We have septic tanks, and we're on top of the hill. So we're on a flat surface on top, which slopes down into his property. If that soil comes down, who knows what else is going to come down after that? Again, there was no harm that we saw happening in the original plan. There's a potential harm in the new plan that was proposed that we are firmly against. And I would hope that this northern, I couldn't get an answer if this was in the original plan, this 15-foot cut, or if that is, it appears that more soil was removed on the northern end. I would like an answer to that.
We'll get one today.
Yeah, so, but again, my concern is the stability. It does not conform to the community up there. and the concern for continued violation of the permits.
Okay, thank you, Ms.
Thank
Caswell.
you.
Did you have a question,
I
Ms.
do,
Caswell?
just,
Hang on, for
so
Commissioner
how,
Brown.
how large is your property? I mean, is it an acre? Like
Yes.
this?
Careful where you point.
Yes.
Okay, and what is on your property right in this area? Is it-
We have avocado trees.
Okay, so it's all along the property line is avocado trees?
Yeah, there's some that have died off and are missing, but mostly, yeah, avocados all the way down along that border. The house sits back a ways.
And is there a fence between property lines?
There
or-
is, it was just a.
Chain link
an-
fence?
It just,
Oh.
maybe about 4 feet high.
Wood
Wire fence,
All right.
yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, Mr. Jim Gaskin. Try to keep it to 3 minutes.
I think I can. Thank you.
Good for you.
All right. Yeah, my name's Jim Gaskin. I live below the Wangs, one house below this lot. Yeah. at the bottom of the hill. We really have no runoff issues directly with them. That water doesn't make it to our property. Our only concern is, again, the height, as Ms. Caswell brought up, the height of that back wall. There is a large cut there, and it's just visually really inconsistent with anything in our neighborhood. We're concerned that if they do a large, it would seem to be a concrete retaining wall that would act to retain that property. It would be a large negative visual impact to the neighborhood. And I don't really know how they'll retain that area otherwise. I think that's really the bulk of my comment. That and the mass of the project being raised up like that. I want them to have the best use of their property, of course, but it is beginning to have a large impact on our area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gaskin. I don't have any other speaker slips. Okay. Then let's move on to the appellant's rebuttal. That would be you, Mr. Wang.
Object, is it supposed to be Mr. Need who goes first?
No, you're the appellant. So limit yours to 10 minutes. I don't think you'll need 10 minutes, but
Don't
please
need
no
10
more
minutes
than
unless
10
you have a lot of questions. Again, this doesn't need to be like a personal issues, but if there's character assassinations and so forth, I'll actually just touch upon it, right? The gas line.
Well, it's better if you don't, frankly.
Yeah, okay, I'm good.
Doesn't
then.
impress the commissioners to have it.
Okay, then thank you very much for that clarification, Chairperson Park. So as there's four persons who actually oppose it from the community, right? I think you saw two here today. Mr. McIntyre wrote a letter in conjunction with my appeal process. He was the person who actually lives in front of that road that the water went down. There's a reason why that fence actually showed up the way it did, because that fence is at the lowest point, because we're all wondering what happens with the lowest point. That's where the water is going. And guess what? The swell just goes right through with it. And the reason why the other swell actually is on my property is because there was so much swell coming down that the silt didn't capture that. Just like the engineer just basically said, silt issue cannot confine the water, as she illustrated with earlier in her point. It cannot contain that much water. And Mr. Neely actually put the sandbags after I actually called Mr. Burnett again, because I showed him the pictures of all that runoff. So that Sunday, him and his family went out and put all the sandbags out after the fact, okay? And so that picture shows the after the event, not before the event, okay? And you could see the pipes, my firewood that's been there for years. That's why it's so dry, and that's why there's so much swell. There's probably 2 or 3 stack of thinner wood that's actually under the swell. Okay, so I just want to bring clarification to that. And again, there's no clear answers, right, that I'm getting at this point of what happens to that that bottom section of the property, because they said, well, maybe it will contain. But what happens when we have something like what we did in Montecito at that point, right? That much rain comes down. It is not a natural run anymore, because they've changed the overall landscape of the property. The flow could be the same, but the amount of flow is all theoretical, right? Based on theoretical rain and so forth. But we cannot, as we found out this last year, we cannot predict what the nature is going to do. But if we start changing the course of these properties where the natural flows, that natural flow was established at least 30 years. The way the property normally stood, we never had that much soil runoff at all. The years that I've lived there, nor Mr. McIntyre, who's lived there a lot longer, based on his letter, right? Mr. Gaskin, who's lived there, as well as Ms. Caldwell and her parents, who've lived there a lot longer than I have, right? If you have natural runoff, that topsoil will just go, and it's all good. But if you keep on changing the topography of the property, which they have, right, that's going to have a significant and detrimental effect, which you sort of see in this picture right now, okay? And again, my only contention is the 2.5 feet increase, because that increases the height of the fence as well as everything else along the property, right? And as Mr. Gaskin mentioned, that's getting way overboard to what the original permit was looking like. And the chairman, Santa Maria, eloquently put, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, Commissioner, I'm sorry, sort of put that, how do we answer these questions of what was really brought in and what was really taken out? Because there was so much significant work that was done under the purview and not any oversight of the grading commissioner or the grading officer, right? And that's what our biggest contention is. How many times are we going to let this happen? And the fairness of the process of the permits, right? And actually hear the voice of the community, who actually have strong opposition to any of the additional additions to this plan. Okay?
Are you finished?
All right. Yep.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
And now we have the applicant's rebuttal. Mr. Nee, do you have a rebuttal?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and you please limit yourself to 5 minutes or less. So, Ms. Montague, you'll conduct the rebuttal? I'd like to keep you, whether it's you or him or both, 5 minutes or less.
Okay. Mine's very brief.
Very good.
Mine's
Go.
very brief. Thank
5
you.
minutes between the two of you.
Yes, yes. I want to just acknowledge the words of Ms. Caswell, Mr. Gaskin, and Mr. Wong, that we hear you, and it's, the design has been attempted to be sensitive to all the neighbors and sensitive to good engineering design. So with addressing Ms. Caswell's concerns as the northerly neighbor, the retaining wall that's going on up there, and she mentions the vertical cut, the wall's only a 4-foot wall, but right now, thank you, that's helpful. I don't know how to use this thing. There's a back cut. This is a project that stopped mid-construction. And so there's a back cut for the upper wall that is in place to be able to construct a wall and a footing. And that's where the project was stopped. So you see a big vertical cut where there won't be when the project's finished. There'll be a 4-foot wall with a drain behind it, a little V-ditch, and then a 2-to-1 slope up to the property line. So it'll be much softer when it's completed, and it won't have a dangerous effect or a look like it's a brink or anything like that. It was a 6-foot wall, now it's a 4-foot wall on that north side. So I just wanted to point that out. So a little bit of imagination has to play into when you see the pictures and all the grading activity and the difference between that and what it's going to look like when it's completed. The point about runoff, those are all very important points about silt. Right now, there is very little cover on the site. It's vegetated, but sort of sparsely, because it's sort of a natural cover, but a few plants and few trees here and there. There would be the expectation of runoff with a rainy season as the property sat even before this work, just because it's nature. It's a sloped area with not that much vegetation. Having a rainy season happen while it's mid-construction is the perfect storm for generating silt. So I'm not surprised to see the pictures that I've seen today. However, when the project's completed and everything is properly planted and the hardscape is in where the hardscape is planned to be and the inlets are in where the inlets are planned to be and the detention basins are there, which are sized properly for receiving the volumes of water that they're intended to receive, silt runoff won't be a problem. That's how it's designed. So that's all the comments I had to make today.
Mr. Chair, I have a
Commissioner
question.
Brown?
So, could you go back to the previous slide, please? So, this is just now a 4-foot wall instead of a 6-foot wall.
That's
right?
correct.
So why did you reduce the height of that wall?
The wall's in the same location as it was before.
Right.
But if you would call it the deck, the playing deck of the tennis court is what came up 2 feet. So at that side, the wall, which was 6, came down to 4. I might add, if I might, I know it was your question, so excuse me, but the walls used to be on the perimeter of the entire tennis court. It had 4 sides of walls. And in the redesign, it seemed a kind of a softening approach to reduce those walls and get rid of as much of the walls as possible. And so as you see now on the east side and the west side, the long north-south lines of the tennis court, there are no more walls. And that's a change that isn't mentioned in the staff report, but that is one of the changes that this second design
Right, but with
had.
no retaining, there's no retaining wall here?
No.
So doesn't that make this slope more vulnerable to failure in rain events?
It's a 2-to-1 slope, which is what the grading ordinance allows, and it'll be planted. And there's a drain above the retaining wall with a concrete V-ditch that'll carry the water down to the bottom. We didn't see a need to place a drainage structure from the upper property because there's no concentration point there.
So the height differential from the top of this fence wall to here, to this property line is what?
That's approximately 6 feet in a 2-to-1 slope. So 6 feet over 12 feet in the horizontal direction, and then there's another 5 feet of setback.
Okay, thank you.
One more question then, up here.
Commissioner Blau?
Yes, well, was the original elevation of the tennis courts the 2.5-foot raise, or was it, I mean, we're still trying to figure out how you missed the cut and fill by 1,100 yards. So did we raise the tennis courts during construction?
Yes. Another
Okay, that's-
source of the
thank you.
additional earthwork is, as Mr. Nee pointed out, to the south of the driveway. There's an area there that is a level area that was the intended play area for the grandchildren. So it's the sort of semicircular area that's just to the south of the shaded driveway area. And I would say that's approximately maybe between 9 to 14 feet wide there. And that below that, or to the south of that, is a 3-to-1 slope. And so that received a fair amount of the additional yardage. It was to create that little yard area.
Okay, but raising the tennis court for 2.5 feet would be most of the yardage.
Well, the original design had export, so the
Yeah, okay, I get
raising
it.
of it
Thanks.
just flipped it the other way.
Commissioner Cooney?
Just quickly, Ms. Montague, you don't have this area, but from what I understood of your testimony, you're talking about this area right here that was widened?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Nee, you have some comment? Keep it to 2 minutes.
So just to clarify, and Kiara can confirm this, on the north side, the wall, the 4-foot retaining wall is approximately 17 and a half feet from the property line. So whatever else you heard is incorrect. And Kiara, please correct me but I know I'm correct.
Well, that's what your engineer said, so go ahead.
Okay. Okay, but it's 17 feet from the property line. And the retaining basin to the west of the tennis court does not even neighbor the Miss Caswell. We are very considerate people. That's why when we design the tennis court, we took out the tennis court lights, because usually neighbors they object to lights. So we took out all the lights, and then we put the tennis court at the far corner. You can't go any more west on my lot because it's not allowed by the setback, away from the neighbors' homes. So on the north side, the homes are roughly a little bit to the west of our house, longitudinally. And then the south, Mr. Wang's house is exactly on the same longitude as our house. So that's the furthest that we can put. We try to consider everybody. Again, on the north side, the top of the fence of the tennis court, when it's completed, top of the 10-foot fence is still 4 feet lower than Ms. Caswell's floor in her house, in her parents' house. Okay, so to argue that would be in the line of sight is really interesting, because it is so much lower, even the top of the fence. They might see parts of it, but it's not any different from, right now it's just vegetation.
Okay, do you have any more on rebuttal to their comments?
Lastly, the reason we raised the 2 feet is because southwest corner is so much lower on the terrain from the main house. We wanted to make it wheelchair accessible. And we have one of the endorsement from the community. One of my best friends, a doctor, he's got some friends who's on wheelchair, and it's impossible to find courts available for them, so they would like to access it. But until we raise this, there's no way to access it. It was about 20 degrees. The wheelchair will go down pretty fast. So again, I want to thank you for listening, and I know this doesn't have to be the most pleasant job.
I have a question for you, just because
Yes, sir.
out of curiosity, because I'm beginning to get a picture here. So you made a conscious decision to go up 2.5 feet. And is that anything you ever discussed with your neighbors once you made that decision?
No, because given that how low the court is still going to be, I didn't feel this. We didn't. We were talking to the inspectors. We were drafting the revisions.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
There being no further public comment, we'll close the public hearing and ask for commissioners if you have any further questions of staff.
I just have one.
Commissioner Blau?
Was there a grading, was there a bond required when the permit was taken out for the grading?
So you're talking about the first CDP 18, CDP 9?
Yeah, most grading pits I pulled recently in this county require a bond.
I think that there would have been, but I don't know for sure. I could check with the grading inspector, but I don't know offhand.
That would be interesting for me to know before I make my decision. If there's any chance you can call over to that department and just ask the question, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Any other questions of staff? Then let's move on to our deliberations. Commissioner Cooney, you're blessed with having this in your district. Would you like to start?
I will start. It's not a question of like, though. This is a troubling application and appeal because it has so much antagonism evidence between the parties, even to the point where off-site automobile collision police report was provided to us. And, you know, the Planning Commission is trying to enforce the rules of the county, which are certainly involved here. And we'll make a decision based on those merits. But we're not making a decision as to who's a good person and who's not a good person. Those things are going to still plague the neighborhood long after the appeal is settled. And I feel that there's been a lot of damage done by lack of communication and an unwillingness, for whatever reason, to share information with immediate neighbors. I don't think we had to have this appeal if everything had been worked out between neighbors. For one thing, there wouldn't have been a stop work order in October before the rainy season, and what we've been shown as minor flooding is one of the results of the stop work order. So, you know, perversely, the county's own regulations requiring permits before work is undertaken, in this case, caused damage, minimal damage, I think. But I come from an area where we had real flooding damage and loss of life as a result. So it's a little hard to get worked up about the damage here. I acknowledge it. There should have been a permit obtained before the county had to issue a stop work order. But one of the results of that caused the problem. I hope that the revised plans and the proposal that we have before us today to handle the runoff and deal with the adverse impact of the tennis court is going to be successful, and there won't be the need to come back to the county grading inspector or anybody else in the line and say, you know, you missed this or you missed that. I appreciate that we had Mr. Nee's engineer here to answer many of the questions I had, and so I'm prepared to support staff's recommendation on this project unless I hear from my fellow commissioners issues that I've overlooked.
Any other commissioners want to weigh in?
Yes, I'd like to. This is Commissioner Farini. I too appreciated the engineer showing up and going over the plans. I also appreciated staff's both recommendations and the presentation that they gave. It does seem that things are out of sync there and have caused some problems. But as far as which way water should run and how everything should really work, I am trusting the work of the engineer. As she said early on, she is certified and licensed by the state of California. I think that brings a lot of credibility to the project, so I'm ready to support Commissioner Cooney.
And I will agree with Commissioner Farini. I would make one other comment, though. This is not a minor thing that got exacerbated by the stop work order, but what really happened here is that you had an approved plan, the county approved, and then they started building it and deviated from the plan, not by a little bit, but by a great deal. In 1,100 yards of additional work that was not contemplated when the permit was issued is a problem. Problem for me. I'm concerned going forward that they're going to be able to finish this and finish it correctly. I would hope that's why I hope to find out if there's a grading bond that's been posted in this that would create some penalty if Mr. Dye for some reason goes forward and doesn't complete it properly. I get how the drainage works. It's just that during construction, it was not cared for properly. It was changed without having someone look at it. So I'll support staff's recommendation, but I would hope going forward that we don't see this problem continue.
You must have something to say, Commissioner Brown.
Oh, always. Thank you. You know, just looking at this map, I tell you, it kind of concerns me. It just seems like there's the whole property's been reshaped here just for this tennis court, and my concern is this retaining wall sufficient for this northern property line? If we get a big, huge rain event, I don't know. It's a good thing that they live far away from it, because I don't have a lot of confidence that wall, that this area here, I don't know what this 2-in-1 slope looks like, but on principle, I get where Commissioner Cooney's going, but I can't support what he's doing. I guess it just really bothers me that, we've got 3 basins here to capture runoff. That just seems like a lot on this property, and it all is going to come down here, and I'm sorry, I can't support your motion.
I'm going to make some comments. It seems to me that the work going here is basically per original plan. That the basins, which makes sense to have basins because you'll have a concentration of water flow here, it's got to go somewhere. Instead of it just dumping out there, it'll go into those basins and settle out. I get that. And that's mostly per plan. That the big change, and I agree with Commissioner Blau, it's a big change. That's 1,100 cubic yards, was to make this 2.5 feet higher so that this path, excuse me for being somewhat palsy-like, but make this path less, a lower grade. That's what our applicant just said. And I'm a little perplexed because, it's kind of a straight line. I would think you could pick up that 2 feet just by winding around a little bit, and you would have had the same result. So I'm a little disturbed that there wasn't this communication with the neighbors about what's the best way to do what we want to do, that we're going to make a big change. Because that's such a disappointing form of decision-making, I do join the neighbors in feeling this is all a little haphazard. So I don't much know what to think, and my vote's not going to really make any difference, because I don't like this. I don't like the way it came to us. I don't like the lack of communication occurring, which meant that this all went on like this. But here we are. We do have, as Commissioner Freeney has pointed out, an engineer who's going to back up her work as to how this will all work. So those are my comments. Any further deliberations? Then, Mr. Villalobos, will you conduct a roll call vote? We don't have a motion?
No, not yet, but I've
Oh,
heard
well,
the comments of
then don't vote yet.
my fellow commissioners, and I agree with all of the comments of the fellow commissioners. This is worrisome. I'm not an engineer. I'm aware of the damage that can be caused by excessive runoff. I'm not sure everything's been done to capture the runoff as a result of this grading. The grading inspector says it has, at least in the plans. So unless we're going to take over the grading department in addition to the planning, I think that we have to rely on the experts and remind anyone else that gets into this same situation with their neighbor that if they don't prepare their projects with their neighbors' consent in mind, they're going to be here, and it's going to be expensive. And I'm just hoping this is the last we see of this project. So I will make the motion to agree with staff's recommendations as stated on the second page of our staff report dated June 26, 2019.
I'll second.
Thank you. And, oh yes, do we have a answer to Commissioner Blau's question?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Blau, yes, we do have a response. There was no grading bond collected as part of the first grading permit. There is a new grading permit associated with this current project. We certainly could collect a grading bond as part of the new grading permit that's in if the commission thinks that would help the process.
Commissioner Blau, did you have a response?
Well, just that I'll let Commissioner Cooney make that decision, but it would be my preference that we do that, given the fact that we've got a little history here of not complying with original plans and original criterion. Up to you in your motion, Commissioner Cooney.
Commissioner Cooney, do you want to speak to whether you want to revise the motion?
And Mr. Chair, Commissioner, sorry, this doesn't necessarily have to be in your motion. It could just be a suggestion to staff, and it's not part of the coastal development permit. It would be attached to the grading permit. So you could just give a suggestion and without necessarily including it in your motion, but it's up to your commission.
Commissioner Cooney?
It would be part of my motion that we refer the matter of the bond to the grading, building and safety grading division, and based on our concern about how the revision occurred, they should give consideration to the amount of the bond and whether one should be imposed. So that'll be part of the motion, Commissioner Blau.
Okay.
I'll continue my second.
All right. Any further deliberations? Then now, Mr. Villalobos, will you conduct the roll call vote?
Commissioner Brown?
No.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Farini?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Chair Park?
You know, I'm going to vote no because I don't want to encourage retroactive as-built applications to this degree.
Motion passes 3-2.
Thank you. Let's take a 5-minute break. Okay. So we're going to proceed on items 3 and 4. We'll wait till the room is cleared of those who aren't involved in that. Okay, we'll convene our hearing. And Mr. Villalobos, will you read into the record item number 3?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Jerry Ambrose at Suresite Consulting, agent for the applicant Crown Castle, to consider case number 18 CUP 17, application filed on July 9th, 2018, and to determine that the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to section 15303 of the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Do we have any ex parte and site visit disclosures?
No ex
Mr. Brown.
parte, but site visit.
Okay. Any others? No. All right. Then let's have our staff presentation.
Good morning again, Chair Park, Commissioners. My name is Kiara Ristig, planner in the Development Review Division. The project before you today is a conditional use permit for a new Crown Castle telecommunications facility. The project is located along Ahe Drive in the Eastern Goleta Valley Community Plan area, just south of Hollister Avenue. Shown here is the site plan, which highlights the project site on Ahe Drive and the pole location on the south side of the right-of-way. The proposed project would include attaching equipment to a replacement 35-foot wooden utility pole. A 24.7-inch tall cantenna will be attached to the side of the pole at 26 feet above grade. 3 radio units would be mounted on the pole underneath a brown shroud 15 feet above grade to reduce its appearance as a telecommunications site. 3 fiber down converters would be attached to a new Crown Castle fiber optic cable 21 feet above grade. Additionally, a radio frequency sign and 2 PVC conduits would be attached to the pole. The antenna is proposed to be side-mounted because of the existing SoCal Edison power lines. The antenna cannot be located above the power lines. The purpose of the project is to provide additional data capacity and coverage for the surrounding residential area. Shown here is first the existing and then the proposed southeast and southwest elevations. The highest portion of the proposed telecommunications facility would be 26 feet above grade. The rest of the additional equipment is shown here, including the remote radio units mounted to the pole and the down converters mounted to the fiber cable. Here are photo simulations provided by the applicant showing the view looking northeast from Ahe Drive, both without and with the proposed antenna and shroud. Here's a view looking southwest from Ahe without the antenna, and then with the proposed antenna, and then a closer view from that same angle southwest without the antenna and with the proposed antenna.
Ms. Ristig, while you're there, so
Yeah.
the antenna is projecting out over the roadway?
No, it is, if you look.
I can't see on your photo
Yeah.
sims, it's impossible.
If you look in the staff report and the site plans,
I still can't see. I still don't know.
Well, where is it? It shows it on.
It's
If you look at page, where are we? A1 of the site plans in the staff report, the enlarged site plan, image 2, shows the pole and the location of the antenna, which is approximately parallel to Ahe.
Okay, well, I looked at those and it wasn't clear to me. So it's like facing Ahe, it's going up and down. Okay, I'll ask Mr. Ambrose when he gets up about that. Thank you.
Yeah. So regarding visual resources, the equipment is being mounted on a replacement wood utility pole and will be painted to blend in with surroundings. The project has been reviewed favorably by SBAR, including a site visit, and the project will return to SBAR in July, where the final color for the equipment will be chosen and the rest of the design will be finalized. The project complies With the Federal Communications Commission requirements, the applicant has provided an electromagnetic energy measurement and site compliance report prepared by a third party and shows that the estimated radio frequency emissions are at ground level are 1.1% of the public exposure limit, 48.1% at the 21-foot cable elevation and at the 26-foot antenna level. In addition, the CUP Condition 9 requires verification of the project's actual radio frequency emissions within 30 days of installation and monitoring every 5 years thereafter to ensure continued compliance. In conclusion, the project as proposed and conditioned would be consistent with the county comprehensive plan, including the Eastern Goleta Valley Community Plan. It would comply with requirements of the County Land Use and Development Code, comply with federal telecommunications requirements, and be exempt from CEQA pursuant to Section 15303. Staff's recommendation includes that the Commission's motion would include the following: make the required findings for approval as shown in Attachment A, including the CEQA findings, determine that the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to Section 15303, and approve the project 18 CUP 17 subject to the conditions included as Attachment B. This concludes my presentation, and staff will be available for any questions.
Mr. Chair, another question for Ms. Ristig. The SBAR minutes don't indicate their approval or a favorable consideration. It just says applicant has appropriately responded to previous comments by board. So you must have gotten that information. Did you attend the SBAR meeting?
No, I did not.
Okay, so how did you get those comments?
Well, they would not have allowed it to proceed to your commission without having some.
All right. This is for Mr. Tuttle. If you could pass to the SBAR that they need to be nice if they could indicate that on their minutes, just for continuity. Thank you. Okay.
Any other questions of staff? And do we have an appellant presentation? Mr. Ambrose?
Applicant, yeah.
Oh, yes, that's right. Well, make it more exciting.
I'd like to avoid that. Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. My name's Jerry Ambrose. I'm here on behalf of Crown Castle. At your last few meetings, your commission has asked us some non-site specific questions, sort of broader questions about the 4G, 5G, EMF emissions, FCC standards, signage, et cetera. So today, we have a few folks from Crown Castle who are going to make a few presentations on those topics, and then we can circle back to the site-specific questions if that's okay with you. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Jerry Freeman with Crown Castle regarding the 5G.
I do have a PDF there, 5G. Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners.
Your name is Jerry Freeman?
My name is Jerry Freeman.
Great, thanks.
I'm the engineering manager for Crown Castle in Southern California. My background is in electrical engineering. I've worked in the wireless industry for almost 30 years now. I've worked at 3 carriers in the last 6 years at Crown Castle.
Thanks for coming today.
Thank you. Hope I can answer some of your questions or give you a preview. So I'm here to speak about 5G for Santa Barbara and upcoming area meetings coming up here the next month or two. Next slide. Sorry. Over the last 50 years, we've had the advent of smartphones, 1G back 50 years ago. I started working in 2G back almost 30 years ago. The first text was back in '92. Today we have 4G with the smartphones, your Apple devices and your Androids. We have a lot of video, text, data, all kind of apps and sensors that rely on the smartphone. 5G will bring 20 times the speeds that we have in 4G today. The latency will be decreased by about 10 times. Decreased latency, reduced delays, reduced in the data signal lag will enable 5G applications for the future. With all the devices, the traffic coming from all those upcoming devices, 5G will also address that and increase capacity and efficiency in the wireless networks. 5G is essential for the next generation mobile experiences. The 4G applications we have today, some that have been brought on with social media, some that have been brought on in the automotive, Uber, Lyft, in those industries. We couldn't have predicted some of these when we were in 3G going into 4G. So right now we're just hitting the peak of some innovation for 5G, and we are still going to experience a lot of apps and future applications, devices that we don't have currently a view of today while we're in 4G. 5G did start commercial with Verizon and AT&T last year. Verizon has 5G commercial in parts of LA. AT&T also has parts of the US on 5G. T-Mobile is starting, and with the advent of perhaps Sprint merging with T-Mobile, Sprint will also have 5G in areas as well. 5G is a technology, it's a platform for innovation. It will increase applications in various industries, including healthcare, and more in the automotive, compared to the mapping we've seen in 4G. There are a lot more IoT devices, enabling some smart cities, smart transportation. Some cities already have remote monitoring of power. Some cities already use smart devices for transportation. Cities like San Diego, Austin, there's already a lot of smart city innovation happening across the US. These are just some more 5G applications that are starting today. In the manufacturing, the utilities, you'll see a lot of tracking devices, augmented reality. When we say augmented reality, you might have seen some visors or devices that enhance gaming, enhance your vision of 360 degrees, remote vision of being someplace, traveling someplace. In healthcare, we're starting to see operations that are helped with remote technology where you can see operation somewhere else across the world that may be managed by a doctor in another place. So manufacturing, utilities, healthcare, these are just some of the areas where we now see apps for 5G. I know some folks who starting to develop additional apps like an environmental, aside from what you see today with the Apple devices that already have EKG monitoring. You start to see some devices that may be able to track heat, chemical, smoke. You can figure out taxes on smoking and other things just by some additional devices. SoCalGas already has devices that do remote monitoring of your home's utilities, and these are just some of the devices that will be powered more with 5G, the additional data speeds, and the reduced latency. Uber has some self-driving cars that are already being piloted in Arizona. We have drones that are being powered by 4G currently. With 5G, the reduced latency will enable more reliability, not just with drones, but other applications. What does 5G do for the economy in the US? Globally, it is already driving economic growth. We predict more jobs, more infrastructure investments, and a global increase in the GDP. So in about 10 years, we have the Olympics coming into Los Angeles. There has been the Winter Olympics already in Korea, where they started 5G. With support for massive Internet of Things, 5G will enable great backhaul, reduced latency, increased speeds. Some of the applications for the last Winter Olympics included autonomous cars, some autonomous buses. A lot of the cameras in Korea during the Winter Olympics were powered with the 5G devices. And then virtual reality, augmented reality. Maybe we can see real time the 2028 Olympics from maybe not necessarily in LA, but from Santa Barbara, from where I live in Orange County. The possibilities are endless with the 5G platform and technology and all the apps coming up, including devices, Internet of Things. So with reduced latency, additional speeds, 5G has a lot of promise for the future in various industries.
So when are you rolling it out nationwide? Is it just going from bigger urban areas into the suburbs? Is that what you're doing? Is it by areas, or how is that working?
So for Crown Castle,
Yeah.
we build the networks for all carriers.
Oh,
and
okay.
And other, other companies as well, not just the 4 carriers. So we deliver fiber to enterprise, to businesses, to schools.
Okay.
We also help build the infrastructure, like the small cell you see on the screen today. And we also have towers, which are your traditional macro buildings. We enable 5G. It is out there as of last year. Verizon has it already in Los Angeles. We have various cities across the U.S. also with 5G already started.
So when we see these cantennas for like this project, when you go to 5G, do you need to change equipment, or will it just be a change out from one to the other, or no change out, or what will it be?
It's a little bit of both. Over time, there'll be software changes that may allow the 4G to transmit 5G technology, but currently it's an addition of 5G to the 4G technology.
Okay.
So
you-
it may be an upgrade to the existing small cells if we
Okay,
have them out there today.
Okay, so they wouldn't need to go through this process, this very laborious, time-consuming process to upgrade from 4G to 5G through the county process. You don't know.
It's
Okay.
each city, each county has different rules based on how our 3G, 4G installations were permitted. So
Okay.
I can't say for sure.
But it's just changing, the cantenna would look the same exactly, right?
There might be an additional length.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Okay, good, thank you.
Commissioner Cooney?
Just a quick question, Ms. Freeman. Thank you for coming and helping us through this anticipated morass of technology. My question, I came to the meeting with concerns the projects in Summerlin, and we've now seen 2 in the course of 2 meetings, which are relatively close together. Less than a mile, perhaps a half mile apart. And so in general, and you can wait and testify on that case if you're going to be here, but in general, is it the case that these installations are planned so that they could actually be very close together on separate poles in the same community?
Speaking directly for 5G, 5G is designed to add capacity. So in areas where there might be more demand, additional 5G units or the existing small cells may be upgraded to enable 5G. If there isn't a node there today. There could be an additional node there, depending on demand.
Well, thank you, Ms. Freeman. I think that was an excellent presentation, and I personally had no idea this was such an important transformation.
Thank you.
Mr. Ambrose, did you have anything else you were going to add?
Yes, we actually have a short presentation on the EMF questions that have come up before, signage, those issues. We have another gentleman here, Steve, who will present that. Then I'll circle back to the node-specific questions.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Steve Anderson. I'm with Waterford Consultants. We do RF safety assessments and training for wireless service providers, utilities, and any company that has employees that needs to work around antennas. So, Crown asked us to evaluate an assessment that was done on these projects. So we have sort of a third-party review of a third-party review. Basically, the procedures that are published by the FCC to determine compliance and safety were employed by the other firm. We also employed those methods. Those are applicable to determining the RF radio frequency energy levels at any given location around a communications site, and the limits that we compare those results against are published by are set forth by the FCC in the Code of Federal Regulations. We actually have both sites in my presentation, but we affirm that the report that's been submitted to you, we agree with those numbers, and that these installations will meet federal safety guidelines. So, just some background on the FCC rules. The FCC adopts the standards that are developed by scientific organizations. The FCC is not one of those scientific organizations, so there's an interest in looking to the qualified people to develop those standards. To date, the limits, the standards are based on the established biological effects, which today are thermal. There's some of you, I'll speak to some of the controversy about that, but those, to date, the scientific evidence, which is continually being reviewed, is that it's a thermal effect. The frequencies, radio frequencies that are licensed to AT&T fall in the non-ionizing portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. And again, those biological effects are thermal. When we calculate the RF energy at any given location around a communications site, we're calculating radio frequency power density, which is measured in watts per meters. And the standards are in watts per meter, so you can express a cumulative, meaning all RF sources, as a percentage of that standard. So both in the report that was submitted and in our analysis, you'll see a percent of the standard. So anything over 100% requires mitigation. That might be a site redesign or mitigation, signage, physical restriction. That it's not the rules do not limit emissions. They limit people's access to that impacted area. So in this case, these are relatively low power installations. Antennas are elevated, and that's why the results at ground level and at adjacent buildings are relatively low. I'll talk more about that. So our approach to this, which complements the reports that were submitted, we looked at a little more detailed of the surroundings. These, again, we got very similar results at ground level. Adjacent buildings were well below the FCC limits. Apologize, that's hard to read. But all the results are less than 1%. So this is a varying terrain with different sized buildings. So when we do this analysis, we're looking at both varied elevations at ground level. We're looking at incident RF energy on the sides of buildings. We're looking and we've characterized the heights of the roof peaks. So we're looking for maximum. We're reporting the maximum values that we find at all those different elevations. In this process, I'll go to the site at hand. Again, very similar results. The maximum value that we found was on the building to the south east of the site. It's 1.3% at the maximum point on the building. Again, these are well below the FCC limits, and this analysis is important because how we're modeling this is we're considering the maximum possible power, transmit power that the radios are capable of. So in reality, there's a utilization factor, how many people are using the system. The systems employ power control in order to control interference in the system. So this really represents a worst case scenario. When the site is idling, it puts out reference signals, and in this case, based on the proposed configuration, that what's being constantly transmitted is on the order of what a cell phone puts out. As someone makes a phone call with the site, a little bit of power is added to the signal to support that exchange of information. So in our modeling, what we're doing is we're considering 100% utilization. So everyone's using their phones to the maximum capability of the site. In 5G, those reference signals that are put out are actually a little bit higher power. But what's interesting is when someone makes a phone call, we're using the 5G equipment uses special antennas, so it's a very narrow beam that's focused towards the user. So I'm actually thinking that there's not a broadcast of energy, so I consider exposures to be less, just based on the functionality of the way the system works. Comparable RF exposure scenarios. The cell phones, I've had it characterized by laboratories that do cell phone studies, that cell phones are frequently up against the FCC limits for exposure level. So the concern is that a lot of the research that's being done these days, it has to do with long-term phone use. These values or these exposure levels are much higher than you get from a cell base station, whether it's a tower or whether it's a node like this. And this node is much lower power than a normal tower. I just had a Fios router recently put in my house. It's to get below 1%, I need to stand about 12, 15 feet away from it. So that's sort of calibrates the level of exposure here. But so again, the research that's being done and the concern is primarily about cell phone exposure. The low power from base station is considerably lower and not expected to have, there's less uncertainty with the existing research that's been done on that. So what we're experiencing going forward has to do with high exposures with long-term cell phone use. Any questions on this particular site, or?
Well, I did notice that your reference to, at the ground level, you reference it 1.3%, and the staff reports at 1.1%, but maybe that's, you described it maximum, and this wasn't at maximum, or I'm not sure. But
Well,
it's so minimal, I just wondered why there should be a difference.
So the FCC OET 65 guideline, it provides several different models.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I don't want to get too in detail. But we utilize the antenna manufacturers' patterns. These are very directive patterns, much like this shaped microphone. You don't hear me when I'm over here, but this is where so it keeps it suppresses energy downward, and the results are very consistent.
Any other questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you.
It's very informative. And what do we have next?
So I'm back to answering any questions you might have about the individual projects.
So just the antenna, the way, because I would imagine the antenna, if it were perpendicular to the road rather than parallel, there would be less EMFs at the roof, the slanted roof, because that's here it's 48.1%.
Yeah, this particular antenna, when it comes off of the arm, it's actually southeast of the pole. It actually goes behind the pole partially. Like if you're,
So it goes closer to the house.
right but there is an additional 16 feet of right of way behind that pole.
Okay. Well, I just wondered because normally they're either perpendicular.
They stick out into the street, or
Right,
right. So
right.
this particular one, based on the coverage, goes
Okay.
generally southeast, and it's
Okay.
slightly behind the pole.
Okay, that answers the question. Okay, and I guess maybe for staff, at BAR, was there a lot of public comment? And why we don't see the people today?
Yeah, actually, we had a site visit with the SBAR, and a lot of the neighbors were actually there.
Okay.
And once they saw what we were doing.
Okay, that's it. They didn't
the
know there
concerns-
wasn't going to be.
They didn't even show up for the SBAR meeting that afternoon. So.
Oh, it was a site visit, okay.
Plus
Yeah.
the SBAR meeting itself here right after that, and none of the neighbors came.
Okay.
Once they learned what the project actually was.
Good, okay, good, thank you.
Then you're finished, Mr. Ambrose?
I'm finished, yes.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Do we have any public comment? Then we'll close the public hearing. Do any of the commissioners have any questions of staff? Then would anyone like to make a motion?
I'd just like to make a few comments. You know, it's interesting. I think the last time we talked about in the days before we got to this technology with these big cell towers at 55 and 60 feet, and how it brought out the community and concerns about radiation. And well, today it's much different today, isn't it? With this new technology, which is more focused and less intrusiveness and a lot of other things. So I think that's good. I think it's better. It's pretty interesting, your presentations. We learned a lot. Probably didn't know. Internet of Things, oh boy, that's going to be an interesting thing here. We can just have our planning commission meeting at home and we have to come in. Anyway, so I'm totally in support of the project. I think it's great because I know AT&T service in this particular area, and some of the areas in Goleta Valley aren't all that great. You hear a lot of people complaining they have to go outside to use their phone, and so that's good. So unless I hear something else from my commissioners, I'm happy to support staff's recommendation. That's my motion.
Any comments by any other commissioners?
That was a motion. This is a second.
Good, thank you. Okay.
Any further deliberations? Then, Mr. Villalobos, you conduct the roll call vote.
Commissioner Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney,
Aye.
Commissioner Farini,
Aye.
Commissioner Blau,
Aye.
Chair Park.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. Well, let's move on to item number 4, which should seem familiar. And will you read that into the record, Mr. Villalobos?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Jerry Ambrose of SureSite Consulting, agent for the applicant Crown Castle, to consider case number 17 CUP 38 and 17 CDP 83, applications filed on October 20th, 2017, and to determine the project is exempt from CEQA, is exempt under CEQA pursuant to section 15303 of the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Do we have any ex parte or site visit disclosures?
Mr.
Commissioner
Chair, I visited the site.
And, staff presentation, Mr. Tuttle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioners. This presentation will look very familiar to you. So we're dealing with a Crown Castle site on Calle Colubre in the Summerlin Community Plan area. Just a few vicinity maps here showing the proposed location where the small-scale wireless facility will be installed on an existing pole. And here's a site plan showing that location of that pole and its proximity to nearby residences or residential accessory structures, the closest being approximately 20 feet from an existing garage. You'll note that, and as was shown in one of the previous presentations, those structures are downhill, so they're actually well below the height of the existing pole and where the facility would be installed. So we have here a very similar scope project where it's a canister antenna side mounted to an existing wood utility pole. It would be installed at approximately 23 feet above grade with 3 radio units enshrouded in an enclosure approximately 9.5 feet above grade, and a new fiber optic cable line at roughly 20 feet above grade with fiber down converters to supply power, DC power, to the site. There are, this existing pole does have several communication lines that would all be relocated to a new arm at a roughly 20 feet above grade, and then the required sign attached at approximately 8 feet above grade. And here are the existing elevations showing from the northeast and southeast, showing the existing lines on the existing pole, and then the proposed elevation showing the addition of the side-mounted canister antenna, the new communication arms where the new lines and existing lines would be relocated, and then below that the equipment shroud and sign. Here's a few photo simulations. You have existing condition to the left and proposed with the equipment on the right. And then again from the other vantage point with the existing condition to the left and proposed to the right. As with the other project, from a visual standpoint, this is small equipment co-located on an existing utility pole where the equipment would be painted to blend in with the existing pole. As with the other project, this was reviewed and supported by the BAR, who had favorable comments on the project and said that it could come back for preliminary and final approval after action by your commission. From a health and safety standpoint, emissions from the equipment would be approximately 1% of the FCC regulations at the ground level and 48% at the antenna elevation. And as you heard from the applicant's presentation, those levels do diminish as you go further away from the antenna. The project was reviewed and found compliant with policies and ordinance requirements of the comprehensive plan, including the Summerlin Community Plan and the Coastal Zoning Ordinance. It complies with the federal regulations for emissions, and it has been determined to be exempt from CEQA pursuant to 15303. And with that, staff recommends that your commission make the required findings for approval, determine the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to section 15303, and then approve the project subject to the conditions included as attachment B. And that concludes my presentation, and I am available for questions.
And does anyone have any questions of Mr. Tuttle at this time? Then let's go on to the applicant presentation, if there is one. Mr. Ambrose?
Good morning again, Jerry Ambrose here for Crown Castle. I don't have anything to add to staff's presentation. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Ambrose.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions of Mr. Ambrose at this time? Mr. Cooney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ambrose, as I indicated earlier, my question relates to the proximity of this site to the one we approved on June 5th on Ortega Ridge. And I don't have the exact distance and height, but I was looking at the coverage maps specifically on page 16, and my question is, was this coverage map prepared subsequent to and with that Ortega Hill site in place or not?
Our Crown's RF engineer is here for this project. I'll have to ask him.
Okay.
But in general, some areas are more, you need to have them closer together, more dense, again, based on the demand and based on the existing coverage from the other cell towers. So you see them close together and you see them farther apart. Just depends on the individual area. But he can speak to the other.
Good afternoon. I'm Saeed Garshospi, Senior RF Engineer with Crown Castle. Unfortunately, I don't have a knowledge of the location that you suggested. But the way this project is more like offloading the current capacity, is not necessarily creating a network. So if there is one that is basically their radius is like these ones are about 600, 700 feet coverage radius. So if you wanted to have a continuous coverage, it'll be basically about mile and a half to 2 miles separation from each other. But again, the main purpose of these locations are basically to reduce or to alleviate the capacity and be able to streamline the data coverage.
Yeah, well, helped by the presentation a little while ago of the need for the cell coverage in the first place. I'm prepared for an answer that says, you know, we need a lot more of these if we're going to fill out a meaningful network given the demand. So I depend on the coverage maps to show before and after. And in this case, it's not clear whether it was done, but I'm going to assume you wouldn't want an installation that is duplicative of one that already exists.
No, absolutely not. So these locations are basically picked by our customer AT&T, and these are the ones that they have the live data, and they identify the locations in which their customer have a high need, so to be able to fulfill their needs. So these are how basically these locations are picked, and we're basically implementing or building the network for them.
It is interesting to me because all of the applications we've seen for the years leading up to this, there's quite a distance between towers, and now that we've got this node technology, it appears the distances are shrinking. But on Ortega Hill alone, not on the street, but on the hill, we have an existing AT&T tower that was installed maybe 4 or 5 years ago now. And the representation at that time was it would provide coverage for the entire area, the entire neighborhood. And one of the big customers at that point was QAD Technologies, which is on Ortega Hill, just across, in fact, from the proposed node that we approved on June 5. And I'm assuming that the demand there was high, and so that was the location. But do you have any comment about how prior coverage from towers is less effective with this new technology? So we're in effect going to be going back over the same areas that have towers and filling in with nodes. And then as a follow-up question, if it was my neighborhood, I'd be in favor of getting rid of the towers with the higher RF and putting in more nodes to reduce the exposure, as well as for aesthetic reasons.
Yeah, great points. I mean, back in the days when they were basically all these carriers were they were deploying their network, their main objective was to provide coverage, to be able again to establish 2G, 3G, and 4G. Right now, basically, well, still we're in a 4G stage. So those towers are basically solely to provide coverage for people to make a voice call and perhaps to be able to get some data. These ones are basically the ones that basically allows the carrier's customer to be able to make use of higher data streaming, for example, Netflix and all these things. So that's why we have a tower there. At the same time, not too far from it, we have like one of these small cells to be able to offload the capacity and reduce and help that tower over there to cover the nearby customers of the carrier. Does it make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. So you're not suggesting that adding a couple of nodes closer to the tower would eliminate the need for the tower?
Well, I think down the road it's possibility, but currently it's more like a complementing and supporting the towers there. But again, when we go to 5G, perhaps it's all about really to be able to have enough data streamlined to as Jerry mentioned, to be able to support higher data streaming and reducing the latency. So it's possible.
If we see applications come to us, and we haven't in quite a while, for a new tower, we're rightfully going to question the need for the tower given the possible instead of installations like these that are before us today.
Yeah. I mean, Crown Castle, we do tower and basically small cells. I could say if there is a need for a tower that's coming from our customers, I suspect it would be more like a coverage demand versus the actual capacity. So that's what my comment is on that.
Okay, well, thank you. And Ms. Freeman may have something to add in that respect. But as far as I'm concerned, that's enough of an answer.
Thank you.
Okay, and that finishes the applicant's presentation, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
And, oh, no, I'm sorry, we were already beyond that, so we're into questions. Any public comment? I don't see anyone to comment. We'll close the public hearing. Do we have a motion?
I would make a motion, Mr. Chair, to approve the recommendations of staff set forth on page 2 of our staff report dated today, and find the project exempt from environmental review, as well as making the findings for approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Commissioner Brown seconded, even without a microphone on. And, but we all heard it. Anyone need to comment on the motion? Not hearing a request for deliberations. Mr. Villalobos, will you conduct the roll call?
Commissioner Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney.
Aye.
Commissioner Farini.
Aye.
Commissioner Blau.
Aye.
Chair Park.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Excellent. That's our last item for today. But before we adjourn, I asked Mr. Wilson to address the projection report again very briefly, on specifically as to our August 14 meeting.
Chair, Park, members of the Commission, as we discussed briefly during the projection report review, the department has received a request from the agent for the applicant to request that the Commission continue the item on August 14th, which is related to the ERG project, the oil and gas project. And they are going to be looking at potential changes to their project description and maybe pursue or explore including solar facilities as part of their project description. But it's still at the preliminary stages, but they would like to have some more time to explore those areas, and they're going to be requesting that that item be dropped, basically dropped from the projection report, and then it'll be noticed and then rescheduled whenever we have that information ready and available to return back to the Commission. So that's what's going to be before you on August 14th, and since we set a date certain, it's going to remain on the projection report until that date. So the department will work with those people that have identified themselves on our interested parties list and the other individuals that we know of, to just give them advanced notification that this request has been submitted so that they can plan appropriately for that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wilson. That's excellent. It's just what I needed. So let's adjourn. And Mr. Farini, I want to tell you that I'm personally very disappointed you didn't come down here to take me out to lunch on my birthday.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're on your own.